Ready? Okay. I think we're ready. Can I have everybody have their seats? We're about to begin. The meeting is about to begin. Can I please have everybody take their seats? There we go. Only 2 whacks of the gavel. That's not bad. I'd like to call this meeting of the Budget Committee to order. I just want to let everybody. I went out to my. I go to David's Tea every once in a while, and I pick up my tea. You've probably seen me with my cup. So I got a new tea today. It was called Moment of Zen, and I'm hoping it lasts quite a while. So. Yes. Well, that one was there too, but I chose this one. So. Anyway, I'd like to call this meeting of the Budget Committee to order. I'd like to welcome all the members of the committee, of course, and members of council who are here, and all the public and all the media. As you know, the screen at the back will keep you up to date with where we are in the agenda. It's pretty much one item or 2 items, operating and capital. And you can also follow on your tablet or smartphone at toronto.ca/council. This meeting today is a special meeting of the Budget Committee. It is the launch of the 2016 operating and capital budgets. Before we get into that, I'd like to thank the Mayor, my Budget Committee members who have been actually working quite hard over the last couple of months on the rate-based and other things. I'd like to thank the City Manager. This is his first budget, and I think he has done an exceptional job, so I want to thank him. And of course, Rob Rossini, all the Deputy City Managers, Josie Levita, and their staff for the hard work that they've been doing in preparing the budget over the last number of months. I want to thank you very much for that work. I'd also like to extend my thanks to all the divisions and agencies and their heads and all the efforts that they have gone through in the informal budget process. We recently saw the approval of our rate-based budget, and now we're opening the beginning of the capital and operating 2016 budget. On that, it is time to begin. There's a lot of hard work ahead of us over the next couple of months. In that, are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act?
I think everybody's got an interest in this.
Seeing none?
Mr. Chair.
Oh, sorry, Councillor.
Out of abundance of caution, I'd like to declare an interest in items related to Toronto Public Library, as my spouse, although on leave, works for Toronto Public Library.
Okay, thank you. Now I'd like to turn the presentations over to the City Manager and the CFO, Rob Rossini, and they will get us through the decks. They are now, I believe they have been handed out, or they're in the process of being handed out. After we go through the presentations, there will be questions on the presentations only.
He's in a long term.
I'll leave it to you, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you so much, Chair. As you indicated, I have Josie Levita with me and Rob Rossini as well. If I can take just a moment to briefly reiterate my deep and fundamental pride in this city, in our public services, and frankly in the Toronto Public Service for the excellent work I believe it has undertaken in the preparation of this preliminary budget. I will speak relatively briefly, I hope, to where we are in general terms in terms of the fiscal context of the City of Toronto. Rob Rossini will walk through the more detailed positioning of where we are with the preliminary budget for 2016. I'll then make a couple of brief comments. Councillor Crawford will have an opportunity to speak around managing any residual gap, and then Josie Levita will take us through the capital budget. Just to confirm that Rob, Josie, and I will also be available for the media technical briefing, which I believe starts at 2:30 this afternoon. So as we know, the 2016 process was started in May or June of this year. It was done in response to the basic expectations that were established by the acting city manager and by the budget chief, and there were a handful of parameters associated with that. A target of 1% of savings against the 2015 base, efficiency or productivity gains on the order of 2%, and of course an expectation that that would be achieved without direct impact on services. That target was established on a net basis across the board to all city divisions and, of course, to agencies as well. That unfurls itself into a long and fairly complicated process that required enormous amount of due diligence by agencies, by divisions, by a variety of players, with financial planning in particular, working very closely with many different actors to try and make sure that we present to Budget Committee and broader council information that is accurate and information that provides as much transparency as possible into the underlying budget process and the underlying decisions that are your responsibility to undertake. This is my first year through the process. It is an excellent process. I will admit to some frustration and some challenges as we go into the details of the budget and the detailed definitions of net versus gross, the interplay between reserves, revenue, a handful of things, sometimes makes it difficult to understand where any given decision enhances or detracts from the economic value of the program under consideration. So this is a complicated place with a complicated budget. We have tried very hard through this budget process, and we'll speak to this as we go through, to give you, decision makers, the cleanest possible understanding of the underlying numbers and the underlying economic basis on which we are presenting the information. So staff have provided a preliminary budget. We've done that on basis of a series of criteria. The savings measures that we have undertaken have aimed at sustainable savings. We have recommended or put in place a small number of revenue measures, which are sustainable and in our view make some economic sense. We have worked hard to provide the best forecast on both expenditures and revenues. And by best forecast, I mean what we think is closest to likely to happen. And if we do not have a good, solid economic case for understanding the numbers might change, we've used the existing numbers or the numbers that we understand will end the 2015 basis. That's a complicated way of saying that we have been excruciatingly careful on revenue and expense to strip away any implicit padding. So we have been very careful to try and provide councillors with the most accurate information. We will not always be so because circumstances will change over time, but the policy intent, the work undertaken by staff in this budget has worked on very clear criteria to try and make the information as tight as possible so that you councillors as decision makers can have some confidence in at least the basis of the underlying information provided to you. And of course we've done that in the context of the directions provided by the acting city manager and by the budget chief without direct impact on services. That leads to the outcomes that Rob will describe as part of the preliminary budget, and these are quite positive outcomes. The budget pressure started, as you'll recall, at something on the order of $426 million, fairly large gap. That has been whittled down over time to $57 million. That $57 million represents a policy-neutral position, or very close to a policy-neutral position. What I mean by that is that does not include any change in tax policy relative to property tax, so that's at a zero property tax rate increase, nor does it accommodate any of the things that this council might want to put into the budget as increments. From a city manager and a staff perspective, looking at a budget that had a residual gap, we did not feel comfortable adding to that residual gap. We feel that the kind of core decisions about what the property tax rate should be, and in particular what incremental savings or additions should be made once we have provided the preliminary budget, that is, we feel strongly, I feel strongly, a city council responsibility, something that you as elected political representatives will want to undertake. So that $57 million is something that does not include any policy changes relative to incremental spending that may be directed by council, or any further savings, or a particular level of property tax increase. If we take property tax increase tied to the current rate of inflation, which 1.3%, year over year to this point, that number, that pressure drops to, Rob, about $23 million. Quite a small gap. Again, that's before any new investments. Councillor Crawford will speak during this presentation to give you a sense of his comments about how he would like to lead Budget Committee through the resolution of that residual. Now, that residual is quite small, and there are important decisions to be made about that. And I suspect that a fair amount of the rest of the dialogue of this committee will focus in on managing that very important kind of balancing part of the strategy. That will be achieved. The City of Toronto, by law, achieves a balancing strategy every year, and I'm quite confident that Council will work its way through that. But I'm also concerned that that is the very end of a process. It's the margin of the margin. And I do want to take a little bit of time to step back and have a conversation about the overall revenue model of the city. I spent some time in front of executive talking a little bit about some of the underlying expense drivers. I'm going to take a little bit of time at this presentation to talk a little bit about some of the underlying revenue context of the city. That's in order so that Council, as it thinks about the 2016 budget, as it thinks about any incremental expenses it might want to undertake, any incremental reductions it might want to undertake, can have a little bit of visibility into where we are heading, status quo, policy neutral context for the 2017 budget. So this is something I think is important, that we not only focus in at the margin, but that we actually begin to initiate a dialogue around the underlying fiscal context of the city. And this is also key to understanding where we will likely end up in terms of the multi-year capital funding process and budget, which will be outlined by Josie. So I'm going to start with my formal slides now, if I could get them brought forward. So this is a little bit of a funny chart from the perspective of the city. It's not one that we normally present, but I wanted to take a step back and look at basically, from a citizen's perspective, how much money we are extracting from citizens and the rough way in which we do that. So these are our primary own source revenues, and we can, plot different elements of this, but fundamentally, working up from the bottom, we have property tax is the light yellow bar. User fees are the rate revenues are the grayish bar. User fees are the slightly darker green. And of course, the incremental piece is the municipal land transfer tax. The chart on the presentation is slightly different than the chart in the written material. The chart in the written material has the x-axis starting at 1%. I prefer it to start from 0. It gives a little bit more accurate picture, so I apologize for the deviation or the difference between the two charts. There are a couple of things I'd like to point out relative to this. First of all, since 2012, the city's revenue sources, own source revenue sources, have actually declined. They haven't gotten any bigger. So this is to try and get it as a sense of the overall economy. So what space, what's the footprint of the city, our revenue sources of the overall economy? It's down a little bit. And as I discussed in front of executive a few weeks ago, the distribution of that has also changed. And in particular, you can see that there's less reliance on property tax over the last several years, a little bit more reliance on rates, and a little bit more reliance on user fees. And within the user fee box, the primary user fee here is TTC fares. There are others as well, but TTC fare collection is the primary driver. And of course, the big increment of that is associated with land transfer tax. In many respects, this is a comforting picture. It shows that our revenues are relatively stable. It shows that the City of Toronto has been able to, my view, deliver high-quality public services, been able to adopt a number of council-directed enhancements, and at the same time has actually been applying pretty good value for money. The overall tax share, the overall revenue share associated with our own source revenues has in fact gotten a little bit smaller over the last number of years. That's looking retrospectively. Next slide is one that is important because it speaks to our major revenue source. This is a reiteration from my December 1st Executive Committee presentation, but I would like to walk through a little bit because it has fairly substantial implications going forward. In the middle of the chart is we have total tax increase. As you can see, that is less than, over time, inflation. That's actually a primary driver for why those numbers and the share of GDP is actually dropping a little bit over time, and why city government is becoming a little bit better value over time for the tax and revenue base. Residential taxes have been increasing a little bit higher than the rate of inflation. Non-residential taxes have been increasing a little bit less. A couple of things that I want to draw out here. The distinction between residential and not residential is not based on people. Non-residential also includes people who live in apartment buildings. It's the rate of tax applied to apartment buildings of more than, I think, 7 or so units. So that is a substantial source of revenue. The reason that line is lower is because City Council has what I think is a very good policy to reduce the impact of taxation on high-rise buildings or buildings with more than 7 units and on job-creating businesses. The result of that, though, is that anytime we tie a property tax to residential, in practical terms, we end up with a lower overall increase in the revenues. So in essence, when we set, as we have from time to time, when we link the rate of property tax increase to residential rates, condos and single-family homes, that results in overall revenues coming in less than the rate of inflation. That means that, again, our primary revenue source will be getting a little bit smaller, not dramatically smaller, but a little bit smaller as a share of the overall economy, assuming the overall economy continues to grow in an ordinary way. I apologize for the nerdy slides, but I do want to spend a little bit of time just laying out kind of a core revenue construct here. I'm going to go to the next slide, and the material looking backwards has kind of looked at it on an all-in basis. The annual budget, in a practical sense, also deals with what happens at the margin. It deals with kind of the incremental money we have available, and that tends to be the council's focus. And I'll spend just a second on this slide. Since 2007, the city's revenues are up in property tax and land transfer tax by the better part of $1 billion. In that, assessment growth, which is basically the natural growth associated with new building, has added, $200 or so million. Property tax increases directed by council over that time have added the green element. So that total increment is on a base now of about $3.7, $3.8 billion. The much smaller land transfer tax has actually contributed more than the tax increase. So we have become, at the margins, extremely dependent on the incremental revenue, frankly, the unforecasted revenue, the bonus performance of the land transfer tax going forward. So I'm not providing any policy recommendations here. This should not be construed as a conversation about a particular policy direction. I simply want to give council a better sense, or a pretty good sense, of what the numbers show. And I'm going to split from this and then talk a little bit about the ramifications going forward, again in a policy-neutral context, just to give you a little sense of what that might mean going forward. But in essence, the budgets that have been balanced over the last number of years have taken very substantial advantage of increases in the land transfer tax. And as councillors who have been here for a while know, that has been largely unexpected, unforecast performance, reflecting the very strong performance of the Toronto property markets. I want to take a look at this now and project this going forward, and I'll define how the projection works in just a second. For 2015, again, you can see that assessment growth a little bit less than 1%. The council mandated property tax provided an increment of whatever that number is, a little bit more than 1%. The big jump here is land transfer tax, an incremental jump on top of that being the Scarborough Extension levy. So I think an important way of looking at this is that when council made its 2015 budget, it had own source revenue growth on the order of 4.5%. A very large chunk of that own source revenue growth came from municipal land transfer tax, the increment here, the incremental money. Same thing for the current budget. The current budget that we are presenting in a preliminary way is based on revenues which increase fairly well from assessment growth. Assessment growth this year up a little bit more than 1%. Tax increase, in this case, we've modeled this tax increase at the budget chief's policy direction of residential property tax constrained to CPI, 1.3. When you work that through the numbers, that means an overall property tax increase on the order, Rob, I think of 0.95. So a little bit less than 1% overall. So in effect, the majority of the incremental money that underlies the revenue side of this year's budget comes from very significantly strong performance, budget to budget, of the municipal land transfer tax. These are forecast to forecast numbers. They're not actual to actual, but it gives you a sense that that underlying this year's budget mechanics is almost 5% incremental revenue, a fraction of that coming from the Scarborough levy, a fairly large chunk coming from MLTT, and smaller parts coming from natural assessment growth, and in this case, property tax modeled at 1.3% set at the residential. So that is the kind of underlying fiscal basis of this year's presentation. Just to be crystal clear, the $57 million number I talked about earlier would eliminate the yellow bar for 2016. So I have switched constructs there just to be crystal clear on that. I think the more important and kind of fundamental part of this slide is moving forward. And what is modeled here is a couple of things. It is our judgment that MLTT is a somewhat risky revenue source going forward. So what we have done is we have assumed that the entire revenue performance, the entire revenue gain of 2015 will be reflected in the 2016 budget base going forward. So we have budgeted, in effect, $527 million worth of MLTT for the 2016 budget. There is no caution, no prudence built into that number in order to support this year's budget. There is a small policy change associated in that, which Rob will provide details on. But this provides essentially full value for MLTT to underlie this year's budget process. If that does not reappear, in other words, if MLTT stays at its current level, does not increase, that's what yields us the bars going from rightward from 2017 going forward. So what we've modeled here is assessment growing at 1%, property tax increasing at 1.5 or so, and the basis of that is an assumption that the Bank of Canada hits its annual inflation targets on the order of 2%. We set residential property tax at 2%. We do the arithmetic associated with that. And then, of course, we've also modeled in a proposal, and to be very clear, it's proposed, but something the mayor spoke to in a speech, the proposed capital levy. So what this would mean, in effect, is that over the last number of years, because of the overperformance of the MLTT, the very strong performance of the MLTT, Council has had annual incremental revenues on the order of 4, nearly 5% to support the budget process. This budget process is supported by own source revenues rising by about that much. That rate of increase will fall from roughly 5% to roughly 2.5% if we undertake kind of a property tax based on CPI inflation going forward. So I'm not trying to describe this is not policy advice, this is not a recommendation, this is simply to give Council a sense of what that looks like going forward and to provide a little bit of background as you undertake any measures to close the small residual gap for this year. And I'll just show the last slide, which is the same information, just presented on a dollar incremental basis. So in 2015, budget to budget, Council had a little bit more than $150 million worth of incremental revenue available to it. In 2016, the budget that you're seeing right now, with the residual set at $23 million, has almost $200 million available worth of net incremental revenue. If we take MLTT's performance and translate that into a stable revenue source going forward, but failing to grow, and we model property tax looking at the rate of inflation, residential property tax key to the rate of inflation going forward, the incremental revenue growth diminishes over time. And for the 2017 budget, Council will have essentially $100 or so million going forward, and that grows, but it doesn't grow as dramatically as it has in the past because MLTT's performance is we've modeled tapering off. So the underlying point here is that the 2016 budget worked out well. You'll see the numbers. Rob will take you through that. But as we look forward, Council should think about a context in which revenue growth is not supported as strongly by a fairly narrow tax base associated with the land transfer tax. So again, I emphasize this is policy neutral. This isn't advice about what should be. This is a description of how Council has been able to achieve incremental revenue in the absence of policy decisions over the last number of years, and how in a status quo context going forward, that incremental revenue is likely to decline. So I'll then, final two slides just to bring this forward. 2016, more revenue based on MLTT. That incremental revenue has been instrumental in supporting additional expense, and as Rob will explain, that additional expense is largely clustered in the agencies, in transit and Toronto Police. That has still left a modest residual gap in the budget. So even with kind of $200 million worth of incremental revenue, we haven't quite been able to stuff into that shirt size. We've come very close from a preliminary budget, but even with that additional $200 million, we're still looking for Budget Committee to provide us with some additional direction around what incremental investments Council would like to take from a policy basis, and then any offsetting measures, if those are put in place, for additional savings and revenue. So that's the 2016 context. 2017, we can reasonably expect that the gains in property tax will slow, that the municipal land transfer tax will be stable. It will be baked in at $500 million, but it will not continue to grow steeply. There may be a proposed levy directed to Council, to Capital, if Council agrees with the Mayor's proposal. But when you take those things in aggregate, the Government of Toronto will have fewer new dollars than it has been accustomed to in the past, and that means, in effect, that the government is getting marginally smaller as a share of the economy. So as you think about how you position the 2016 budget, it's worth remembering that 2017 has at least the potential to be a different year. So I want to be very clear. These are not baked-in-stone forecasts. These are not absolutely certain. This is essentially a revenue construct. What happens if? But I do want to take the opportunity, before council delves into kind of the details of balancing and incremental revenue strategies for 2016 that are around the $30 or $40 million mark. Those are very important decisions, but I would like you to have some visibility and think a little bit about how that sets us up forward for the delivery of services and the cost to our residents as we go forward from this. None of these numbers portray any reduction in MLTT. These all assume that the factors that brought us MLTT up to about $500 million in 2015 stay stable over that period of time. I apologize for the somewhat nerdy slides. I know there will be questions. We'll go to the more familiar material from Rob now. I appreciate your indulgence in allowing me to try and spend a little bit of time setting some background context in terms of our overall revenue footprint. Rob, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Peter, and thank you, Mr. Budget Chief and committee members. So here's some slightly less nerdy looks at the 2016-2017 budget. It's not nerdy, it's fine. So, assessment growth. Beautiful. So, despite the cranes, and I think I've talked to you about this story before, assessment growth has been stunningly, in the last 3 years, up until 2016, less than 1% a year. 2016, we've got almost 1.25% assessment growth. It was driven largely by high condo closings this year. Once the condos close, they hit the tax base, we tax them, I'm a happy man, I get some money, and bang, 1.23. So a little better assessment growth than the last 3 years. It's actually, in terms of dollars, $48 million versus the 25 to 33 we've been experiencing since 2013. Next page. So we have done a lot of things to try to balance the budget, a number of strategies. They include revenues, they include some user fees. Peter talked about how the MLTT has grown substantially. But there are other things, non-revenue items, that we have done. We have looked at expenditures. We have deferred some things. We have used operating surpluses to fund budget pressures, not directly in the budget, but, for example, pressures for risk and insurance, for employee liabilities, for assessment. We've taken monies from the surplus, put it in reserves, used those to fund those budget pressures instead of putting them in the levies. We have done, back in 2011 and 2012, efficiency studies. We have done the core services reviews. So we have done a number of things over the last few years to try to wrestle with our opening budget pressures. But as you can see on the graph behind you, it's getting harder and harder to do every year as we pick off so-called low-hanging fruit. This year, we went to the well again. We had some efficiency targets directed to us from Budget Committee, and we've had a number of other measures to try to do and reduce our budget pressures. Line-by-line reviews. We have some use of anticipated surpluses at the end of the year that we will put in reserves to try to forestall budget pressures. So we've got about $170 million of savings there. So that's something we've been dealing with. On the expenditure side, our pressures, next slide. This is a slide Peter had, and we've shown before in different terms in line graphs. But this shows where the sources of our expenditure increases, our spending pressures since 2007. And you see the purple bars there and the green bars there. Basically, 91% of our spending pressures are being driven by two program areas. The green is the TTC and emergency services, fire, police, and EMS, TPS, land ambulance services. They are increasingly eating up a larger share of the budget. Because they are increasingly eating up a larger share of the spending room, that means All other areas have been really growing slower, and in particular, the divisions of the city. And as you'll see, again, you'll see many divisions have come in under zero. We've had targets the last 4 years of -10, -5, 0, and 0, and this year's target was a -1. So we've constrained other aspects of the budget to provide for increases in these areas that are largely driven by, a lot, like, for example, in the emergency services, spending is driven by compensation costs. Those are arbitrated collective agreements, and, very, very difficult to control. In fact, I would be safe to say that all large urban Southern Ontario municipalities are facing these pressures. So that's on the spending side. So going forward, slide 16, we've got increasing demand for transit and public safety. We've got some master plans approved by council to increase the amount of paramedics and emergency services response times. We know the pressures we have in the capital budget. We're trying to increase CFC. That's capital from current. That's basically down payment on our capital projects, and debt. Because we're expanding the capital projects, that's going to involve some extra debt, and that debt involves in debt repayments, so it's a big factor, and I'll show you in a little while what the dollar terms of those things are. There's still some one-time revenues and reserves that were driving pressures into 2016, as those revenues aren't sustainable, so we had to take them out of the budget. And then this year, and I've got a slide on that, big pressures in 2016 from decisions made in 2015 to expand services. In particular, transit, $50 million alone in the TTC, and I've got a slide that shows you some of the more other details. So all of this on the expense factors are driving expenses well in excess of what a residential tax rate of inflation is handling, and we've had to look to other means to try to balance the budget. On the revenue side for 2016, as I said, with assessment growing at 1.25% or 1.23%, revenues from assessment are fairly low to moderate, but they are actually growing at less than expenditures. So that's resulted, my third bullet point on that graph is a large reliance on the MLTT this year as in past years. And that's, one of the ways this budget is getting balanced and this preliminary budget is being delivered. Don't forget, we have pooling compensation. The loss of the Toronto Pooling Compensation Grant, we didn't get it last year. It was announced in 13. We kind of used one-time revenues, savings from the province writing off the Toronto loans. We got through 14 that way. We got through 15 with a plan to phase in that pooling compensation grant, the unexpected grant loss. The total grant loss was $150 million. The unexpected grant loss was $129 million. We got a plan now to phase it in over 4 years, 15, 16, 17, and 18. I'll give you an update of that plan. But again, that in its own is like a 5% tax increase spread over 4 years. It's a 5% net budget impact. So we're still dealing with that hangover in 16, and we'll continue to deal with it in 17 and 18, but we have a plan now. There has been an election. There's been some good sound bites about potential assistance for capital and for other grant programs. Hopefully we'll get some money down the road on housing, but it's still uncertain. It's early days in the new federal government, and we'll yet to see what kind of funding assistance and reliance we will actually get. The platform talked about some big investments for transit capital, for housing capital. We haven't put those into the budget yet and into the capital forecast. We'll have to wait and see when the first budget is delivered. So that's two. So let's take a look at the operating budget and the pressures we are facing. $426 million of pure spending pressures is the forecast before any revenue changes in the budget. That's a big number. a very big number, and you see how it's been split. TTC and Wheel-Trans, a large chunk of that, almost a quarter of it, $106 million, and about half of that driven from annualizations from decisions made in 2015 carrying over. A lot of the service improvements that were approved by council in 2015 didn't start January 1, so the budget impact of those are phased in over 2 years. So there was an overall $95 million gross budget increase in spending in the TTC. There's about $50 million spilling over, annualizing over into 2016. And then we have other base increases in the TTC. We have compensation increases through collective agreements already approved, and those still coming forward, and that's across the corporation. I talked about how capital is driving impacts on the operating budget. It drives it from in 2 ways: higher debt charges, original projections $41 million, and our policy to try to increase capital from current, the down payment, the tax dollars that we use to fund capital projects by about 10% a year. That was another $18 million. The police originally were coming up with increases of $53 million. You saw the pooling compensation that I talked about, the purple slide. So as you see how this circle is forming, there's a lot of pressures in spending on our budget. In a picture, here it is. We have a stairway to heaven and a stairway to the opposite thing of heaven, and this is our stairway up. We start at a budget of 2015, and how do you build it? Well, you see in a picture in that pie, here's those individual things. Labor impacts, non-labor impacts, impacts from prior years, the $85 million, the capital impacts, the one-time reserve funding that's not sustainable, some $25 million, debt charges, other base changes, and I have a whole list of what those things are, plus the TPC, the pooling compensation. That brings it to the 426. I want to pause a bit on slide 21. I want to talk a bit about what are those $85 million of budget decisions in 2015 that impact 2016. About $35 million, there's the top panel. $35 million are coming from city divisions. A chunk of that, almost $25 million, is reversal of revenues that aren't sustainable. And what are they? The Child Care Expansion Reserve, $12.7 million. And we knew from Bill 31, we were going to get some revenue tools to help recover POA, that's Provincial Offenses Act revenues. We put those in the budgets. We're actually going to realize them in 2015, but those were catch-up one-time revenues. What we're finding, though, is we were hoping that basically traffic tickets will rebound to make up that loss in a sustainable way. That's the bet we placed in the 2015 budget. Well, that bet didn't pan off. Traffic tickets are rebounding a bit, but nowhere to the level that we were hoping for and assuming in the 2015 budget. So there's going to be some continued pressures in the POA traffic tickets, basically traffic tickets budgets. We're not getting that all. On the annualizations from the programming side, you see about $10 million, and you see their winter maintenance, $3 million, parks and forestry rec programs, $3.4 million, the revised forestry plan, we have put some money in there, $2 million, and that rounds out the city, $35 million of annualizations from 15 going into 16. The big ones, however, are in the TTC. $27 million in service improvements that were introduced partway in the year, and now we're paying the rest of that into 2016. We have the new interim bus garage that we had put in the budget opening. I believe it was starting the lease in September, with some buses rolling in December. So there's the annualizations of that, $6.3 million. Other TTC net workforce additions for growth, $5 million. There were some service improvements, almost $7.9 million for the Wheel-Trans, and that rounds out $47 million of service improvements, annualizations in 16, stemming from 15 decisions with the TTC. And then we had some small reversals and revenue drivers that rounds out about $2 million. So that's that. The next thing I want to talk about is the pooling compensation. We had a plan to spread that increase about $43, $44, and $45 million over the next 3 years, 16, 17, and 18. We did get some good news. If you recall, in the year end in 2014, we applied about $30 million of the surplus for this problem. Originally, we were going to borrow $60 million of interim financing on the capital side. We reduced CFC. This is how we managed the problem. If everybody recalls, we reduced CFC and borrowed money, increased short-term borrowing for 3 years, and then rapidly repay it for the next 3 years. What we did in 15, though, because the surplus was larger than expected, instead of borrowing $60 million, we only borrowed $30 million, about half, and that's resulted in the following. Instead of increases of 44, 45, and again 45 in 2018, you see the increase in 2018, the pressure will only be $37 million. About $10 million less than what we forecasted, because we took that $30 million in money that we didn't have to borrow in 2015, and we spread it at the back end of this plan. So that's a little bit of good news that the pooling compensation plan, my little red clicker is not working so well, is a bit better than the plan we had last year. Okay, slide 23. Here's a graph showing the individual components of the spending pressures, but it's not all bad news. We got some good news in this budget. Luckily, we got an MLTT. Yay. No? I like it. So $150 million of revenues to non-property tax revenues to offset those spending pressures. And what are they? As Peter alluded to, there's a $100 million increase in the MLTT. We've matched those, and I've got a slide. We've matched those to 2015 actuals plus a new measure. So that's a $105 million increase. The TTC board has approved a fare increase of, I believe it's a nickel on tokens, 25 cents on cash, no increase to the Metro Pass, and then a fare freeze for seniors and students. And Mike, if I got that wrong, correct me.
10 cents.
And 10 cents. Okay. That's pretty good. So that generates $18 million. We have put that into the preliminary budget because it has been approved by the board and council. It's here before council for ratification. We've got some good news on the upload of services, $22 million. That's just the OW component. There's about another 6.8 million, 6.9 million in uploading for court security services. That's in the police budget numbers, so that's some good news. And then you see some of the other changes. So when you look at after revenues, oh, sorry, one point I do want to say. If you recall, last year, I stood up in front of council when we delivered the budget, we delivered a forecast. That forecast last year in January for 2016 had $424 million of spending pressures. Well, you know what, folks? That was pretty close. When we started the interim budget, it was 426.
Crystal ball.
I don't want to brag, but we weren't blowing smoke. And when I show you the 17 forecast that's in an appendix, these pressures are real. Where we were off, because we're conservative, a little bit conservative, is on the revenues. We're forecasting about $42 million in revenues. Luckily, they came in better than expected. So spending coming in as expected, revenues coming in better than expected. But, so the projected tax increase before 14 million, after revenues, we got it down to 7 after revenues. So let's talk about what some of the measures that are in here. MLTT. So that's what's in the budget. We had $425 million. Actuals are coming in at about 520. So we've matched actuals in the operating budget at 480. We still do have $40 million of MLTT revenues that we are applying to the capital budget. So there's a bit of insulation there, there's a bit of prudence there. So the first $40 million, if this revenue source goes south, at least it's matched up to capital projects, which are much easier to defer and deal with than if it was the tax levy and a deficit. So we've got that. We've also got for council's consideration one revenue measure on the MLTT. The province right now pays about $70 to Terranet, $70 a file to Terranet to collect the tax. We pay that right now. Province imposes a transaction fee on every new home buyer to recover their portion of the admin costs. So we are proposing in this budget a $75 transaction fee, and that goes to cover two things. One, the $70 transaction fee, which the city is absorbing right now, that's being passed through from Terranet. So we're saying let's pass that through, and MLTT people who are buying houses will pay 2 transaction fees now, one that they currently pay to the province and one now for us. That fee will come out to about $75. $70 pays the Terranet transaction fee, which we are currently paying right now. Plus, we've got about another $1 million of our own admin costs. And so hence, that's why the fee is another $5, $75 in total.
Rob, I'm just going to interject here for one brief moment. It is, I think, important for councillors to understand that we have taken in the full increment of MLTT 2015, and we baked that into 2016. We've baked that, the full incremental change is baked into supporting the 2016 operating budget. We have also put $40 million into capital associated with that, consistent as the pattern last year. Rob characterized that as prudence. It's only prudence if you ignore the reality that we are underfunded on the capital. Sure. So it is an easier decision for council to make, but fundamentally what council should understand is that unlike in prior years where staff have been cautious with MLTT, actually cut the forecast going forward. We have brought the full forecast going forward to support the 2016 tax-supported budget. So it is all in. It doesn't decline. It takes it full value going forward, and then adds the incremental $5 million transaction fee that Rob described.
Okay. So in the past, we used to budget like 80% of revenues, then 85, then 90, and 95. We're all in at 100 now. Okay, so the Stairway to Heaven, slide 25. This is how then we have brought this budget down to the $57 million net preliminary increase in the budget. We did line-by-line savings of $8 million. There's a number of base changes in the budget of $112 million. These are changes, savings. They could be phasing things in. There could be some use of reserves, as I said before, but these are no impact on services. We took a look at our debt charges. There was about $3.8 million in savings there. We looked at our tax write-offs, all our non-program expenses, all our non-program revenues, tried to, match them up basically at actuals. We re-looked at our employee liabilities. There's a number of things. Included in that number, too, of $112 million, the TTC had undertaken the same kind of exercise. There's about $43 million of TTC nipping and tucking and savings in that number, as well as almost $17 million from the police. And then there's some straight efficiency services, that's, efficiency changes. That's where we looked at our business and are doing service in a different way. There's the $100 million of MLTT and so forth. There's some revenue changes, $47 million. That includes $22 million of upload savings, $10 million in additional supplementary tax revenues, and we took in about $5.8 million of additional reserves from our tax write-offs to help smooth some of those. We do have the second policy measure, and I'll flip to the page, next page is, as we said in the, I'll go to it right now, 26. As we said during the rate budget discussions, we would be bringing forward proposals for adjustments to the solid waste management rebate. And here is the proposal that we've got before council. So council has already approved a 3% waste management fee increase. So you see on this panel here on the left-hand side, that is, you see the different bin size, you see the 2015 bin fee, you see the rebate, and you see the net cost. So I'll just pick a line. The net cost for a year for a small bin is just under $11, $10.63, and it goes all the way up to $3.43 net of the rebate. Zip over to the panel on the right-hand side, left-hand column. We add the 3% fee to the 2015 fee that council approved last council meeting, and you get the new fee before the rebate. That's the right-hand panel, left-hand column. So we've got proposals for reductions for the waste management rebate. The proposals on the table that we put in the preliminary budget for council's consideration is no impact or no reduction to the small bin fee, an $18 and a $36 reduction to the fees for medium and large bins. The proposal for the extra large bin is to eliminate the rebate in its entirety, about $111, $110.85. And then with that, in this column here that I'm pointing at, that's the proposed reduction. That would be the proposed new rebate right in there. And then this would be the new fee or the new net cost after the rebate. So you see the small bins would go from $10.63 a year to $17 and change a year, almost $18, $7 a year. And then you see the net of the rebate, the impact on the medium bin, about $26.65 a year, the large, just under $48, and the extra large, we've concentrated the increase on the extra large because we want people to shift their habits, recycle more, move from the extra large bin going to the large bin. And we'll have staff here when we get into this, into the budget deeper. We'll have staff from Waste Management to explain the policy rationale. All of that said, if this proposal got approved by council, it would save from the tax budget $11.9 million. We also have an appendix which shows the actual, shows a little more details. It shows the amount of bins, the amount of actual customers that we have by bin size, and provides a little more detail. So that's the proposals, that's the options on the table right now from staff that have been included in the preliminary budget. Okay? Slide 27. So, when you show that, this is just the table of that stairway on how we balance the budget. So this is how you get to that $57 million net preliminary increase, and I stress preliminary, in the budget. What would that mean to property taxes? If we stopped right here and 23 hands went up and approved the budget, what we have is the residential tax impact would be I'll call it 2.2%, 2.17%, 1.46% on total. Again, because of our tax policies, a residential tax impact of 2.17 means we spread a third of that on the protected property classes of multi-res and commercial and industrial. That yields actually a total tax increase of just under 1.5% if we stopped there. What does that look like? What are the drivers behind this preliminary budget? $57 million net increase in the net budget looks like this. There are basically 4 drivers of the net increase of $57 million. It is the TTC, it is police, it's our capital financing, i.e. CFC increases and debt charges, and the loss of Toronto pooling compensation. Basically, city operations and other agencies, there's a small little sliver there, other agencies of $4 million right there. That's the total increase. City operations basically have come in on a net basis, plus the revenues that we've got in corporate non-program revenues and expenses. We've come in at below zero, so we're constraining ourselves to make room for basically these other 4 drivers in the budget. Priority investments in TTC, police, driven largely by arbitrated compensation agreements, capital financing. We all know the pressures in the capital budget. The capital budget is not decreasing, it's increasing, but yet even with this increase, and you'll see in Josie's budget presentation, there's a heck of a lot of projects that are currently being discussed not included in the capital budget. So we're constraining city operations and divisions. Those are the 4 pressures. Slide 29. That's if we stopped here. What if council said, well, I want a residential tax increase of no more than inflation? So here's a scenario. If you do have a residential tax increase of inflation, then we're not chasing $57 million, because a residential tax increase at inflation for the end of October is currently running at 1.3%. That generates $34 million. So this net residual or gap or whatever you want to call it is $23 million. I'll make a couple remarks. One, every 1% residential tax impact or increase raises $26.4 million. Or put in other words, every quarter point is about $6.6 million. So that's where we would be. I want to caution though, and let's go to the next slide. There are very few new and enhanced programs and requests that we've been able to fit in this budget because of the pressures that we were facing. There are, on a net basis, about $600,000 of new and improved enhancements, which council has already approved that we have put in the budget. They're basically 3 items. One is a 4-week extension for the outdoor ice rinks. 2 is phase 2 of the Swim to Survive program. And then we have actually another one that council approved, which actually makes us some money. It's the X Place, providing community energy to the new hotel. We have a bunch of other new and enhanced requests that are in the budget that have a net zero impact. Large amongst them is about 66 FTEs in TESS to continue operating the OW system and administering the OW system under the new provincial system, SAMS. SAMS is causing us problems, as it's causing problems in all municipalities. All the kinks haven't been worked out. It's a new provincial system. We have to run it. And what's been happening basically is, and as Pat can talk and Julie can talk a bit more, we're running our old system and our new system until all the bugs are sorted out, and that's 66 more positions. Because we have maxed out on our OW 50% administration grant, we are proposing to take that money out of the OW stabilization reserve so it doesn't have an impact on the tax levy, and we hope that those problems get fixed throughout 16. So those are basically the only things of new and enhanced that are included in the preliminary numbers that you see before you. So what's not included, and this here for the first time we've put a handy-dandy slide, and it's also in Appendix 2, every measure that council has referred to the budget process, we have laid them out for you. There is about $10.6 million gross, $9.2 million of items that council has directed that we consider. We haven't fit them in, but we're being totally transparent. They are here in Appendix 2. Then there's a number of poverty reduction items that still aren't in this budget, but they have been referred to the budget process. They are set out in Appendix 2. It's about $6.5 million gross. There are other items that have been referred to the budget process, primarily coming from Parks and Environment, about another $20 million. Then we also have all the items that have been approved by the individual boards. They are now before you. So you see the items referred to, new and enhancements approved by the TTC board, by the Public Health Board. Also, the TCHC has approved a number of measures, about $13.7 million, that were in the interim report of Senator Eggleton on the TCHC. They are not in the preliminary budget, but they are now before you for consideration. We've also laid out the accountability officers. They've asked for some increases. And then city clerks and legal, because they really report directly to council. We are highlighting those. And there's some small staffing increases, one each in each of those two offices. You add it all up, it's about $67 million of items that have been referred to the budget process that are not included right now in the preliminary budget. So the decisions that council have to make is how many of those do council want, and then how to deal with it either in a revenue or an expense manner in the capital budget deliberations. Okay, so that wraps up my part of the presentation. I do just want to quickly go page 73. There's a lot of things we used to put in the presentation, and I'd talk on for hours and hours and hours and maybe put you to sleep. We put those in a presentation, and we put those in the presentation in the appendix. Appendix 1 has the gross and net budgets summarized by cluster and major agency group. Plus, we have also handed out this handy-dandy budget summary, which shows for... I know, well, you've got it. So we hand out for every division, that one there, yes. Oh, mine's in color. We should have given you a color one. Yeah, you know what? We will get you a colored one. It's much easier to see in color. I apologize for that. So what it shows is for every division, every major agency, plus every major expense category of capital financing, non-program expenditures, and non-program revenues, what's happened there. So that's in your package. Plus, as I said, Appendix 2 is all the items, each individual measure that has been referred to the budget process. Appendix 3, we've provided 2 taxation scenarios for you. One is if the preliminary budget stays the way it is, we show you what the individual tax impacts are for residential, for each of the property classes, and then I show you what happens once we add in the CVA and the policy impacts, and then what happens if you add in education so where we sit. Those things are starting on page 102. So we provide two scenarios, as I said. One is if the budget gets approved as it is today, and scenario two is what would happen if the budget got approved at a residential budget increase of 1.3%, and then we add on the CVA tax policy impacts, we add on the Scarborough subway levy, which was pre-approved. This is the third year of that. And so they start on page 102. We also have some tax comparisons in there. And, oh, we have the forecast. I do want to talk just quickly about the forecast. And unfortunately, for 17 and 18, it doesn't get any better, folks. We're still looking at 400 million plus of expenditure pressures for 17. A little better, about 300 million in 2018. And that's it.
Thanks, Rob. So I'm just going to take a second to characterize my understanding of the preliminary budget to this point. I think staff present this with some pride. I think staff have worked very hard. We've worked under a specific policy context, which is to try and provide Budget Committee and broader council with the most accurate kind of information we can provide, stripped of artifice or manipulation, to be very direct. We have worked hard with staff and with city staff and with agencies to make sure that our expense projections are as accurate as they can possibly be. We've used our best understanding of the revenue projections. We have not built in any incremental prudence into the revenue projections. Where the revenue projections are supported by the underlying economics, as they have been for the MLTT over the past number of years, we've baked them in and put them in at full value for going forward. We have not included any council referred items because there is a gap. We think that is a better conversation to be held by you as council members. But overall, there has been a sustained effort to provide council with the cleanest, most direct, most clarified set of preliminary numbers on 2016 operating. That does leave a small gap, and it does leave an opportunity for council to consider what incremental investments it will undertake as it does that. I am very confident that council will be able to make those decisions, that you will be able to provide us with clear policy direction relative to 2016 and be able to reach conclusions on a balanced budget going forward. I would urge you as well, though, to not only think about that as you proceed through this forthcoming debate, but also think a little bit about two other important pieces. The capital overhang, and Josie will speak to that in a few minutes, and also to think a little bit about the ramifications of 2016 decision-making processes going forward relative to the 2017 and out years, and how that relates not only to what we spend, but also we ask our citizens to fund. So I believe, Councillor Crawford, that you wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit about your approach to Budget Committee from this.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. City Manager. Thank you, Rob, for your presentation. And I guess as both the Mayor, the CFO, and of course City Manager have laid out, there's going to be some difficult decisions that are going to have to happen this year as it relates to the city finances. But I'm confident that through this process, the Budget Committee is going to be able to make the right decisions for the city. There has been a letter that has been circulated by the Mayor that was sent out last night. And I just wanted to highlight a few things from that. I fully support this letter that has gone out. It focuses on two main areas, which is targeted investment and spending restraint. So it's important that we address the state of the finances through this letter. As it mentions, we're keeping taxes low, but to continue to invest in the priorities of the city. I can promise you that through this process over the next couple of months, we're going to have a very accountable, transparent, and open process. As the city manager has laid out, there are some decisions that we're going to have to make, and it's going to be very open and transparent for the residents of the city. But like the Mayor, I'm optimistic that the 2016 budget will achieve the right balance between investment in the city and the financial prudence to keep taxes as low as possible. City has to be affordable, and as a committee, we need to be disciplined and live within our means. What I wanted to talk briefly about is some of the contents of the mayor's letter, and I just want to ensure everybody that we fully intend to continue the targeted investments that we've been doing over the last number of years, specifically transit, transportation, housing, poverty reduction, emergency services, and we are still reconfirming our commitment to the arts. What that really means is, as I've said, we got some work to do over the next couple of weeks. The city manager has laid out to us a $57.4 million pressure, and if we add to that a 1.3% property tax increase, that's $23 million. What they haven't done is added into that mix is all of the priorities that we have outlined we want to do. So our challenge will be to identify what those investments are, add them in, and we're going to have a new number that we need to deal with. I'm not sure what that number will be. The process will kind of decide that. Once we have that number with the new investments, we need to figure out how we deal with that. As the city manager has done through his budget, we're going to have to look at three things to bring that into balance, really, is income opportunities, fiscal restraints, and one-time opportunities, to do, in essence, what the city manager and the CFO have done to provide us a balanced budget. So that's going to be our goal over the next number of weeks. It's a lot of work, and I respect the fact that the city manager has brought it to us in this way. We have work to do, and again, through the process, I'm confident that we'll be able to develop a good budget that will be to the benefit of the entire city. Thank you. And I guess next we're going to go over to Josie to deal with the capital presentation.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'd like to now have you turn your minds over to our capital side of the House. I just want to start by outlining some of the challenges that we're seeing in our capital planning and budgeting. As you know, we have a 15% self-imposed guideline that we've set in terms of the amount or the ratio that our debt servicing is in accordance to our own revenues. And we have used that as the guideline to determine our debt affordability, and we're constrained by that, given all the expenditures and the debt associated with that. As a result, our current funding is well below our needs and council direction. We've got our state of good repair backlog. While stable in some areas, it is quite significant and still growing, despite the investments we've made in the last few years. And what you'll see as I go through this presentation, between what we do have and what's in and what's not in, is that we're starting to see a push-pull between funding the city that we have and funding the city that we want to have. To help mitigate some of those financing challenges, we've taken various strategies, including how we manage our debt repayment. We have our surplus management policy, in which we take 75% of any year-end surpluses and put them into a capital financing reserve to help mitigate and be able to fund additional capital. We've been growing our capital from current funding that's in our operating budget by 10% per year, so we can have a healthy balance, and our goal is to about a 50-50 share between debt funding and operating or current funding. And in now the year two, we have actually been moving some of our initial funding, or some of our funding from the MLTT into that capital financing reserve as well, and you saw the numbers outlined by Rob. But we do and need to continue addressing both our prior approved capital as well as our unfinanced debt, and so there'll be a discussion about that component as well. So we have inadequate funding. It's not really stable, and I don't think it's truly understood. So we're going to kind of walk through some of these elements now. So for this 10-year capital plan, it's $21 billion. It's up from our last 10-year capital plan by about $1.4 billion, mostly because we've added gross expenditure funding for the Gardiner based on the hybrid base case that was before council, a little bit about $300 million more to TTC and little bits here and there. But when we look at our spending on the left-hand side, still 75% of that is going to TTC and transportation, and most of it to our state of good repair. Next slide. Okay, so over the 10-year period, this is the table that you're used to seeing where we're comparing by our major program areas what the actual gross expenditures are in comparison to our debt target. Over the 10 years, it's about $660 million. The key drivers are in transportation, where the debt impact of adding the $1.2 billion to the Gardner is about $440 million to the city. We've added back about $50 million into our facilities in Cluster C for the Northwest Path Phase 2. In the other programs and city clerks, there's some additional debt funding for voting machines out in the outer years of the program. In our smaller agencies, our Sony Centre, we've done a condition audit assessment there beyond the internal renovations that have happened, and we've had to add some additional funding to deal with the exterior envelope. And finally, in the TTC Scarborough Subway extension, there's about $51 million, and I'll be explaining that. So let me just focus now on sort of two key areas where there have been some significant change. So earlier this year, we had a report at council. There was a direction for us to come back as part of the budget process to identify the cash flows and the sources of funding for the base case based on a procurement strategy or an AFP approach. So that has been built into this capital plan. So $2.3 billion is included in the transportation's capital budget. It assumes that base case of the EA preferred alternative. There is still an opportunity to further accelerate project delivery, but that has not been built into this plan as of yet. Next slide. So just quickly on those numbers, working from left to right. In the 2015 budget process, what we saw was a total project cost for the Gardner of $1.9 billion, of which in the 16 to 25 period, we had $1 billion. And then there's another $900 million outside of the 10-year program. This 10-year capital plan in transportation now brings the Gardner project up to $2.6 billion. And in the plan, we have almost $3 billion with a residual of $341 million. And that's because we've accelerated 85% of the cost of construction into 2023. So essentially what we've added in the final, in the difference column, that circled there is the $455 million in debt funding, but overall it's a almost $3 billion gross expenditure value that's sitting in this plan. Next slide. The other item that's seen a change is in the York-Spadina Subway Extension project. So in March 2015, Council approved a $150 million in-year project cost increase for a reset. And we had to fund that in-year, in part through, we dedicated the TTC surplus from 2014 to fund a portion of it, but $90 million, about $50 million of that, $90 million was the cities, and then we had to identify some money from the capital financing reserve to do that. So that was taken care of in year, and that increased the overall project cost. What we have now reflected in this year's capital plan are two additional adjustments. One is a revenue correction of $85 million in total. So the Move Ontario Trust had an expected interest earnings value of about 85 that was to happen. That has not happened. And as a result, $51 million is being added to the 10-year capital plan, hence the increase in debt from the city's portion, and $34 million is coming from the region of York as their contribution. So that's adjustment one. Adjustment two is the plan always anticipated that we would have available to us tax increment financing of $99 million. We have not ever received the provincial enabling regulation. We had anticipated this, and so there was a provision set aside in the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve Fund where the funds were being held as a contingency, and we are now applying that value. So there's so outside of the $51 million, that last item has no additional cost on our capital plan. So once again, in terms of the tables, on the left-hand side, the original project had a project cost of $2.6 billion. We added the 150 in year. And this year, the adjustments on the right-hand side is the additional $51 million that's now in the plan. So the revised total project cost at this point in time is $2.784 billion. We have been advised that the TTC, by TTC staff, that they will be reporting to the Commission in early January on any additional costs. That has not been built into this capital plan. However, we have built some capacity in our debt borrowing in the event that there's some additional cost to help deal with that. So anything that happens, we'll be bringing all that back for reporting purposes. Okay? Next slide. So this is the 2016 capital budget. We need to put this up because this is really what you are approving an appropriation of funds for. $2.2 billion this year. Essentially has the same profiling as the 10-year on the spending side. On the funding side, though, it's mostly debt funded compared to our CFC funding because it doesn't have the impact over the 10-year period, as you'll see in a moment, of our 10% growth policy on CFC. Next slide. So one of the critical elements that we do as we plan and allocate resources, our key priority, of course, is ensuring that the assets we do have that support our service delivery are maintained in a state of good repair so that they're reliable and available to us. And so we track the backlog of capital projects for those purposes annually, and we then track them as an indication of the asset value that we have. So what you're seeing here is really a stabilizing level of backlog. So overall, dips a little bit in the outer years, but you start seeing it creeping up, and we'll talk about that in a second as we move to the next slide. So this just rolls back that by a layer. And so when you peel back the onion, what you're seeing in transportation, in particular, still $1 billion of backlog sustained over that period of time, and that is really despite $1.75 billion that we have invested in transportation since 2013. Mostly in local roads. That seems to be the major area that we're seeing, and as we are fixing local roads, we have new local roads that are coming to the end of their useful life that are just replacing that. In facilities, primarily we are seeing about almost $200 million that we're going to have to deal with of funds required to ensure AOTA compliance by 2025. We've put the 2016 funding in, but we have 9 years that we still have to, funding that we have to address. In library, they have just updated all their condition audits, and we're seeing another pressure of about $75 million there. So the backlog is still growing in some areas. The one area that's still relatively good news until they update their audits is in Parks, Forestry, and Recreation, where we had dedicated funds a few years ago to their public-facing assets, and we actually put them on a downward trajectory. Okay, so where does the money come from? So if you see, look to the $21 billion in the green shaded areas, those are the city's financing sources. Provincial and federal subsidy, primarily in TTC and in the expansion projects, make up around just over 30%. Our reserves are quite significant at 14%. That 2.4 of it is the capital financing reserve, and that is the money, and I'll show you a slide in a moment about how we are putting money into that helps fund this capital plan that then mitigates against the debt that we're spending. And when you look outside of development charges, in the green area, we are looking at a combination of capital from current and debt funding of just about $9 billion, and relatively 50-50 split, and that's our goal in terms of what we want to get to. All right, so let's talk a little bit about debt. So the next slide highlights for you really who are the debt drivers. And interestingly enough, it used to be TTC that was at the top of the list, but because of the Gardner and some other major investments, now transportation is there. TTC then comes next, and then you see kind of the list from there on in. So while TTC has a $10 billion capital program, the debt there is about a third because they have the ability to enjoy some funds from the other orders of government, whereas in transportation's case, total capital spending is about 5.3 and about 0.4 of it is in debt. So we need to identify some new sources there to help manage the state of good repair backlog and some of the major projects and capital demands that we have in transportation. Next slide. So this plan has a debt issuance profile as highlighted here. You can see high levels of debt issuance in the first 3 years. A lot of it is in relation to the debt levels required in TTC for the purchase of their major vehicles. And then we see a bit of a dip, and it varies a bit with a spike up in the latter part of the years, in part reflecting some of the borrowing trends for our portion of Gardner, but also to deal with something that we'll talk about in a few minutes, which is around the unfinanced capital. When you then look at what does that do to our overall debt, 2016, we're starting with $3.9 billion in debt, and this plan takes us to just over 4.4. So you see a stabilizing here. However, this is still managed by our CFC, but I need to show you, and you'll see in the next slide, we still have outer years where the plan isn't fully fleshed out, and I suspect it'll be filled in more because we still have a lot of unfunded TTC in the outer years that has not been built into this plan. So the next slide gives you the profiling on our debt servicing costs, and this is that trend that we're seeing. So this plan takes us to the 14.87 of our 15% guideline. That's a high, yeah, it's close. So we actually have our debt servicing increases, the incremental costs spiking in 2018. So what we're going to see is an incremental year-over-year increase of $72 million in 2018 based on those first years of debt borrowing. And then you see this spike happening. We have to take a bit of a breather so that we don't go over the 15%, and we actually see it coming down in 2022, 23, and then it spikes back up a little bit as we deal with some of our critical issues like the Gardner. But as I just said, when you look at it from this profiling in the outer years, there's a gap under the 15, but we still have some TTC unfunded that is sitting in the outer years that's not in this plan because much of how we've dealt with their total program is dealt with those critical things that had to be dealt with. Much of it accelerated in the first 5 years of the plan, and the latter 5 years are sitting below the line, which I will show you in a few moments. So let me just take you to our non-debt financing strategy. This is something that we've shown for the last couple of years that I just really need council to understand. We call it the capital financing strategy. This is to help us mitigate from our debt and allow us to actually add more spending by using other sources of funding to do that. So we've had this strategy in place since 2012. If you look on the top row and to the left that says 12 to 15 secured revenue. So to date, we have realized just almost $1.1 billion in actual funding. We still have almost 1.3 to go because in the middle part, what you have are real projects that this funding is dependent on in the 10-year program. Okay. Paying for this is subject to prior year surpluses going in, but we know that that's being reduced as we tighten the budget from budget to actual. We have some land transfer tax. Now, this is the second year. You saw that 40 million going in, so it's a source. So to the extent that we have capacity to sustain that, we will. And of course, asset proceeds and dividends. And we have lots of priorities on the capital side of the house for which people are identifying asset sales as a way to fund them. This is another area, this is a key area that is reliant on that, as well as dividends from some of our agencies. So I think really the key message is that they are funding actual projects. And I guess the last point is on the very bottom line. You can see after 2017 on the estimated reserve closing balance that we actually go into the red at the moment. So we are looking to all sources to help us pay for that. Okay, so that's the plan. Now I'm going to take you to the what's not in the plan. So some people call it below the line. In technical terms, it's called S7s because it's the status in our budgeting. But these are a list of our major unmet needs. That on the left, in case you're wondering, is an iceberg, not a tooth and not Africa. But actually, one of our staff in strategic communications actually drew that, so she did a great job. So what I want to show you here is that list that people have been talking about. It's about $23 billion, and it's a series of things. So so what we have here is just to go through a few of these just for a moment. So the portion of the TCHC State of Good Repair backlog in housing that is not funded by the city is at the top. Our backlog that's not being covered off through the program is sitting here. We have $2.6 billion, which is the portion of the capital program that the TTC approved that we have not built into the plan. Plus, we have another $2.2 billion of future needs. So what's in the unfunded TTC that's below the line is growth and replacement vehicles, fire ventilation upgrades. What's in future capital needs would be things like the Young Bloor capacity improvements, platform edge doors, looking at station improvements like Warden and Islington for AOTA, and so on and so on. We also have George Street revitalization that's been discussed through committee and council. That is also sitting below the line as we speak. But we understand that is a key priority for council, and so we'll have to deal with that. Our long-term care folks came forward with a report about what capital renewal is required by the province in order to ensure that our homes are maintained in a state A state. That's there. I just mentioned the facilities AOTA compliance requirements, and then there's a whole series that come from the other programs. It's another $1.3 billion. The city share of what could be what could be for the proposal of Smart Track is 2.6. We've got the downtown relief line that's been discussed, waterfront transit, and I think you're getting the picture on the list that's down there. I just want to point your attention to the unfunded projects line of $2 billion. And these are essentially environmental assessments that have either been completed through the planning process or by way of requests that all have wonderful plans and wonderful expectations of how we grow the system, but we don't have those built into this budget. So 22.3 to be exact. It's the value. We understand that many of these programs or these initiatives would attract potentially other sources of revenue. But this is just to give you a sense of what is in and what is out. And so I'd just like to take a look at the list for a minute and just get you to consider sort of how we are struggling with both ensuring that we can fund our current assets and how we are trying to fund and deal with, improvements and investments in projects to move us forward. And that's the struggle we have. Okay. So this slide isn't It's just really to send you the message that we cannot borrow to solve the entire gap, even if we were to borrow for all of it. It would require us to increase our debt servicing to a percentage of 36% rather than the 15%, and would require us to have significant debt servicing costs as a result. You increase those, first of all, it's not legal. I mean, our cap is 25%, according to CODA. But that would, if we did move something beyond this in this kind of order of magnitude, we'd be talking about operating costs associated with operating these things once completed, and would also impact on our funding for other services. So when you take this last slide, is really just to send the message that we've got our funded projects on the left worth about a total of tax and rate is $32 billion, and you add the $22.3 billion of the list that we were just showing you. Together, that would result in debt charges going from where we are today, which is about $485 million in the operating budget, to about $1.7 billion. So really the key message here is we've tried to, based on our 15% affordability, we've used various strategies to fit in what we can into the 10-year capital plan based on our best priorities as we know them today. The unmet needs really represents a value of what people are talking about, where there's been some work, where we know that there are some indications of moving forward. But clearly we can't borrow to address this. We have to look at other tools. We would, of course, maximize our development charges. We would try to maximize funding from other orders of government. We would be looking to tools like that proposed by the mayor of whether we would look at, the additional capital levy. That capital levy over the 5-year period would generate about $70 million in debt servicing funds, which would give us about $800 million to about $1 billion in borrowing capacity, but we need to really explore all tools. This does not include, of course, any other plans and master plans that might be out there, so there's still lots of work to do. So the final message here is there are choices to be made. I think council needs to consider where it wants to go, what its priorities are, and how best to get there. And now I'm going to turn this back over to Rob to talk to you a little bit about the unfinanced capital.
Okay, so the previous section, Josie was talking about unfunded projects. That's projects that may have been approved in a master plan, approved in principle. They may have been approved by a board or an agency, but they've never made it into approved capital budget. What I'm going to talk a bit about is unfinanced debt expenditures. These are expenditures against projects that have been approved in a budget. Projects have been built, but we haven't actually issued the debt. And it's a growing concern of mine, and I want to shine a little bit more light on it in this budget process. So let's go on. So when we decide to go issue debt on something, we look at a number of things. We look at what did we spend last year that still needs to be debentured. We look at what's coming up this year in the budget plan that's supposed to be debentured. We look at how much money we have in CFC, and we look at, okay, if we issue all this debt, what's it going to do to the budget in terms of the impact on the operating budget and how debt impacts the operating budget. Next slide is, of course, what you borrow, you got to pay back. And in a municipality, it's a little different than the province or the federal government. We actually have to repay principal and interest. And you see, this is the debt forecast that we have based upon our debt projections that's in this preliminary capital budget now before you. So you look at that $22 billion. Last year's our debt charges were $457 million. You see how it's split up between principal and interest, and it's going to actually about $486 million this year. So we look at our debt projections, we look at what kind of an impact is it going to have on the operating budget and taxes, and we try to come up with a plan. Pardon me? Yeah, oh, sorry. So the bottom part is principal. The yellow is principal, the interest is the top row. You see how they match up in numbers too. Okay, so as you see though, we've been trying to do more and more capital projects, and so what's that done? That's driven higher increases in our debt, which has driven higher increases in our debt ceiling limit. So here's our debt ceiling limit. The low bar here, that was the 14 budget. It got pushed up in the green to the 15 budget, and now it's being advanced a little forward in the 16 budget, and we're coming close to the debt ceiling limit. We have in CADA, in the City of Toronto Act, we have the ability to council to set its own debt repayment limit. So debt charges as a percent of the tax levy used to be 10%. We bumped it up to 15%. Let's take a look at what other municipalities face. Other municipalities, their debt limit is actually set in the Municipal Act. It's 25% of own source revenues, right in there. So if we measured the City of Toronto relative to the benchmark or the upper limit that other municipalities have, I just have a collection of GTA and Golden Horseshoe municipalities, plus Hamilton and Ottawa. We're all sitting, in that 4 to 8% range. City of Toronto is about 8.2. Peel a little higher. They got a lot of growth pressures. York still higher, even more growth pressures. So as a percent of our own source revenues, we are kind of middle of the road as other Golden Horseshoe municipalities, and we are all high credit quality. There's double A's in there and triple A's. We're not triple A, but we're a double A and a double A plus. So what is unfinanced debt? As I said, when we go out to borrow or to fund capital projects, the first capital projects, as we spend capital dollars, the first things we apply to those capital projects are our external funds, any federal, provincial funds, development charges. Then we look at our own source funds. That's basically our CFC. We look at what are reserves. And then the last thing we always fund is debt. So the amount of money that we've spent each year but haven't financed permanently, in technical accounting terms, it's called unfinanced capital outlay. It is our negative balance in the capital fund. It is debt that we still have to issue. So we will always have some debt that we need to issue because we spend first, put in all the non-debt sources of funding first, and then we leave it to the end, the debt. Why I'm bringing this issue in front of you, let's go to the next slide. We have always had some unfunded debt. Unfinanced debt. We have always had it. This is going back from 1999. Why I'm shining a bit more of a light on this is because it's growing, and it's making me a little uncomfortable of how much it's growing. So it has been as high as, you see, in 2005, 2003, 2006 to 2007, it grew from 303 million to 708 million. It's been as high as, 30, 40. If you look at 2002, $500 million, as high as 53% of the budget. We kind of goes up and then comes down. But since about 2006, when it hit 303 million, it's grown steadily now to just under $1 billion at fiscal year end when we close the books in 2014. And in our projections, it was going to go up even higher, and that makes me a little uncomfortable. It makes me a little uncomfortable for two reasons. One, we've got historically low interest rates, so I'd like to issue more debt faster to take advantage of these low interest rates, but that causes a budget pressure on the operating side. And then two, the other thing where it makes me a little uncomfortable is you just saw how many unfunded projects that we have that we'd like to make room for. Okay, so what are the three things happened that are the main drivers now that got to the unfunded to this 981, just under $1 billion? In 2008, to balance the budget, we took about $124 million of unallocated capital revenues and we moved them into the operating budget. We did the same thing in 2008. 2008 and 2009. 2009, we took about $93 million of excess capital funding, and instead of reducing debt requirements, we moved it into the operating budget to balance the operating budget. And then in 2013, we were going to issue $600 million of debt in 2013. We ended up issuing only $300 million of debt in 2013, and that's because we wanted to mitigate what the increase in debt charges was going to be so that it would lessen the pressures in the operating budget and the tax increase in 2014. So that's how we got to 2014. I do also want to say is our borrowing, the amount of money we actually borrowed in 2008 and 209 was quite low, 300 million and 400 million. The other one of the reasons why it was quite low, if you recall, capital markets crashed in around August to September. We could not physically issue more money because no one was issuing bonds. There were no buyers of bonds. There was a lot of global financial instability, and we've never been able to make up that amount of money that we didn't issue in those years in 08 and 09 because of the financial markets, because we couldn't then in the future double up 2 years of debt charge increases. So now we've got this issue of 981. Okay? This is just a picture of how it looks like, how it's grown, and the 3 years of where it really kind of ratcheted up. This year in 2015, we were planning to issue $600 million of debt. We actually issued about $700 million of debt. We were able to issue $100 million more. It's built in. Those debt charges are built into this capital budget and this operating budget that you see here. So we're projecting, it's a very preliminary number because we haven't closed all our capital accounts and done our accrual. That number, the unfinanced capital, or the unfinanced debt, may actually take a little dip at the end of fiscal year 2015. We won't know that number till we start doing all our capital accruals in February and in March. So, is it like totally crazy to have unfinanced capital? No, we've got some company with big numbers. Peel Region has about $1.3 billion, mostly because of DCs. The other municipalities, they do commitment-based budgeting. We do a cash flow-based budgeting because we're so big. It is not out of line to have unfinanced debt. It's just that the number's growing a little too big for my comfort. There's our base case. I just bring you to the bottom line. So we're projecting about 781 for the end of fiscal 15, but that number is going to go up before it goes down to about the $1.1 billion, $1.2 billion mark in 2019 and 2020, and then come down. Our target was to bring it down to that $200 million mark at the end of the 10 years, but it's going to go up before it goes down. That makes me a little bit uncomfortable. So we've prepared a scenario here. Page 64 is, what if we tried to bring it down a little faster, bring it down by $400 million by 2020. So there you see here, under this scenario, we accelerate our debt a little more. It's the same spending. We do the backlog, we catch up on it a little better so that instead of having an outstanding unfinanced debt in 2020 and 2021 of about $1 billion or $1.2 billion, we bring it down to $400 million and then down to the $200 million. That would be a nice plan to do. I will show you one thing though. To do it, it's going to have two implications. There's that dotted line. There's we are right smack up against our 15% debt. So if we accelerate the unfinanced debt, it'll bring us up to just under 17%. Is that a tragedy? No, I don't think so. We've had some discussions with our credit rating agencies. They like our liquidity. They like our reserves. As long as we have the ability in a pinch to not have to borrow, like say, for example, there was another credit crunch that happened in 2008. Could we withstand that? Yes, we've got enough liquidity to withstand that. So I don't think this kind of increase to the 17% level would impact our credit rating. I cannot say that 100% certainty, but I feel comfortable about it. And what would that do if we looked at it or expressed our debt in terms of our own source revenues, i.e. what other municipalities do? It would bring it just under that 11 mark. Still not bad, well under the 25. But here's the bit of a problem, is to do that, it's going to cost money in the operating budget. How much more money? You see the cumulative tax increase by about 2021, 2022. It's about 2.74, 2.72 residential tax impact. It would be a small increase in 11, a little bigger, half a point in 2017, growing to about 1.5 points, just under that in 2019. But to hit that $400 million mark, and I think $400 million is probably where we should be, somewhere in that $200 to $400 million mark as an outstanding amount. It does have an impact on taxes, 2.74. So I just wanted to spend some time and shine some light on you on that. So what does it all mean? Some conclusions about the capital budget. Both the unfunded part, the projects that aren't in an approved capital budget, plus our unfinanced debt. What's it all mean? We're going to do a long-term fiscal plan. We're going to bring it forth in the first quarter of 2016, and we'll have to look at the 15% debt service level. We're going to have to look at that and bring back some options. It'll probably, there'll be some recommendations to increase it. Clearly, in Josie's presentation, you can't do that whole $22.3 billion. It just drives debt way too high. It just drives taxes way too high. So we've got to set priorities. Council has to set priorities because we can't do it all. And then the problem I think is significantly large, that we're going to have to look at all kinds of tools and get some direction from council. Given what you want to do, what are the revenues that we need to put in place to do that? We'll have to look at development financing, tax increment financing if it's available, higher debt, yes, I've talked about that, capital levies, the mayor's talked about that, asset sales, other new revenues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Based on the desired level of investment that council wants, we will have to then bring back a plan on how do we fund what council wants to achieve. And that's basically all I got to say today.
What about the process?
Oh, process, okay. We are just starting the process. We're starting the process. We have we've been going down this journey about our service planning. We've got about 2,500 pages of analyst notes that are going to hit the website. I think they've hit the website. We're making copies of that. Everybody will get copies. Councilors will get copies of that. There's got some multi-year budgeting. It shows our service-based planning budgets. And on the website, we've got beautiful, wonderful things that we've done over the last few years. Budget notes, budget at a glance, which now we're calling a budget overview, infometrics. We even have, I think we've got 3 budget videos this year, I think. And in terms of the process, page 71, we're at the start of the tax budget process. We've approved the rate budget. And you see the meetings that are scheduled. We're going to do public budget delegation meetings this year at all 6 civic centers, and hopefully the council will approve the budget, and Josie and I and Peter are still standing on February 17th, 18th, and 19th. Thank you very much. I'm always smiling.
Thank you very much, Rob. I think I need a refill of my moment of Zen tea now.
Hey, life's too short to cry.
Yeah, just moment of Zen tea right now, so. Okay. We will, I'm looking at the time here, it's about 20 to 12. We're going to start questions, of course, and as customary, we have been doing questions with committee members first, and then we go to outside councilors as we've been following. If you've been to any of the committee meetings in the last couple of months, we've switched that over. So, but speaking will be different. Speaking's the other way around, but we've decided. So I'm going to start questions on the presentation. operating and capital. We'll do one round each, understanding, again, it's about 20 to 12. We sort of sense where we are by 12:30, and we'll determine if we have to come back after lunch, depending on questions and all of that. So I'll start with Councillor Pasternak for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. Little surprised at the end when you referred to revenue tools and needing direction from council. It's my understanding that the City of Toronto Act fiscal recommendations have been completed, consultations with all participating councillors are done, and that should have been into the province by the end of November. Is that timeline not been met?
Through you, Mr. Budget Chief, what we said, so all our general recommendations, policy recommendations went into the province end of November. We did say that on the revenues, we will get back to the province sometime in January or February. And they are well aware of that, and they're okay with that timeline.
Well, I understand the consultations with councillors is over. I'm not sure what more we can add other than the numerous council motions and the consultations, but we'll leave that for now. We talk, in the presentation, we talk a lot about the softening of the municipal land transfer tax. But what about contingencies for upward pressure on interest rates? And whether you've done your modeling to see what kind of contingencies we have to build in on that upward pressure, which could be coming in the first quarter of 2016.
So through you, Mr. Budget Chief, we have in our 10-year debt projections modeled some increases in interest rates. So we have done that.
Sorry, I need to step in. There is no modeling or presentation of any softening in land transfer tax. It's projected that it simply not continue to increase, but we have baked in, at potentially some material risk, the full number that it performed last year, going forward this year with a modest policy change associated with that as well.
When it comes to the downtown relief line, it appears as a unfunded capital project on line 50. It's not a council-approved project, so I'm wondering why it's there.
Correct. Through you, Mr. Budget Chief. So I wanted to be very clear. All of these projects, none of these projects have been approved by council in a capital budget. These are all projects that are under discussion in some way, shape, or form. So in the, and I'm having a brain cramp on the name of the consultation on the transit, that has been one of the highest priorities. Feeling congested, sorry. So under feeling congested, that has been one of the top priorities identified, and there has been a lot of discussions around that. So that is meant to say, these are all the kinds of things that have been talked about either in an environmental study, in a consultation process, in a master plan, approved in principle. They have varying degrees of officialness to it.
So it's not a, I mean, it sits there very prominently as a high-ticket item, but it is not approved by council. When it comes to the tests and the 66 positions, that at one time we thought the province would cover that cost because it was directly connected to provincially mandated software. I understand they only covered the first quarter of 2015 and the rest of the year we were on our own with the additional staff. Is that still the case? And is pulling funding out of a reserve account the prudent way to go through 2016?
So through you, Mr. Budget Chief, this is something I don't want to do. This is one of the things that we have to do. So we are, OMASA, AMO, everybody, including City of Toronto, we are pressuring the province that they should pay their 50% share of the OW admin costs, including this. Most municipalities have maxed out that 50% share, so we haven't received a green light, positive signal from the province saying they will pay for this, but we have to continue providing the service and cutting the, and servicing the clients, so we have to do this. Pat can give you some more insight into the discussions with the province and the pressures.
So just very quickly on the special capital levy, just glancing at the mayor's letter from last night and then the discussion here, the funds derived from that services borrowing, is that, it's not the city building fund is not a direct project-driven fund. The funds we raise from the levy, are they to service debt, or are they to directly fund capital projects?
It's your last question.
Through you, Mr. Chair, those are the kinds of decisions that if council wishes us to pursue, we would have to come back with options in terms of how do you use these funds? Is it all debt? Is it all dollar for dollar, see it into a capital reserve, or is it some mixture? That's the kinds of decisions we would have to look at.
Okay, thanks very much.
Sorry, Councillor Layton.
Thank you very much. My questions are going to start with slide 25, and I'm going to work my way up the staircase. I think I understand what the remaining budget pressure needs are. The growth assessment, I understand that. TTC fare increase, that's pretty self-explanatory. The waste rebate moving from one to the other, from the tax-supported rate or transfer for the rebate. The other revenue changes, I'm going to guess that I can understand what those are with increases in user fees and pieces like that. The MLTT, so we're budgeting, we're increasing the amount we're allotting to this. And I have two questions about this. One, how do the new rules around down payments, how do we perceive or predict the new rules around down payments will impact the MLTT?
So the new rules around the new mortgage requirements, where for value above $500,000, the minimum down payment now will be 10%. We looked at our average transaction of MLTT. It's about 638,000. So the new rules will only affect really those values above 500,000. I think what some of the commentary that you're seeing right now is, yeah, that may cool off an overheated real estate market. We have seen very good growth and sustained growth. So, you know, if I had a crystal ball, I'd love to tell you what would happen. But it's only going to affect a portion of the sales above that value of 500,000.
The Bank of Canada earlier today has made a statement saying they're quite concerned about the housing markets in Toronto and Vancouver, and yet seem to be banking a little bit more or betting a little bit more on the MLTT as the way to resolve our budget shortfall this year, against the advice of what I heard from the city manager at the very beginning of the presentation.
No, not at all. This is not against the advice of the city manager, and this is in fact a city manager decision. I think in the past we have had, as city staff, we have underestimated the amount of growth in MLTT over a period of time. We have this time determined that the most kind of policy neutral approach going forward is to simply take the existing amount of MLTT that we believe to be earned for 2015 and project that as a going forward basis to 2015. We can easily reduce that if that's council's direction. All that does is dollar for dollar increase the gap. Frankly, we did not think it was appropriate, and I'll be direct and transparent about this. I did not think it was appropriate to force council to consider, for example, incremental reductions in budgets or incremental additions to other revenue sources, just simply for the sake of saying that we thought MLTT might go down when it has traditionally gone up. So I want to be very clear and transparent about that.
Based on that, just part of your statement, can you explain to me and perhaps give me some examples about what the next step in the ladder means, base changes to achieve targets? What does that mean? Because we have efficiency savings, we have line-by-line savings. There's another line that says base changes to achieve targets, and I don't think we've ever had a line like that before. It's $100 million. What does it include?
Okay, so through you, Mr. Budget Chief. So they are $35 million in non-program savings, and those are broken up by $3.7 million in debt charges. Originally, we were going to borrow an extra $150 million. We borrowed $100 million instead of $150 million. There's the $3.7 million. We looked at our tax deficiency accounts. We lowered those by about $14 million. We looked at certain expenses like employee-related liabilities, insurance. We decided we're not going to fund those pressures in the operating budget. I'm going to fund them from operating surplus, which we've done the last 3 years. That was $5 million for liabilities, $7 million for corporate expenses, $3 million for insurance. We looked at our vacancy rebates, adjusted those, and a few other things, $2.6 million. And then big chunks of that 112, 43 from the TTC and 17 from the police.
And so just as one final question, the TTC improvements that were announced last year that were to phase in over the course of this year, we're only still feeling those increases now. Are they included in the budget that's presented at, with the $50 million shortfall, or are they included in the additional?
Yeah, no, they are in the preliminary budget.
To the base.
It's in the base now. Once council approved them, they're in the base. And they formed part of the pressures, as I said, 50 million, but they are in the number you
Can
see.
we just get staff working on the base, on a list of those base changes? Because it looked like there was a bunch of people frantically writing stuff down, and it doesn't appear in any
We
way.
have all of them. We can
Okay.
provide them.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. Councillor Carroll, next for questions.
Yes, I'll go from back to front. First of all, under the capital talk you took us through about unfinanced debt, it's an interesting walk through history to look at it. I find it very interesting because it really does follow the economy. We really tried hard not to take on any debt when we didn't know what was going to happen. I see during the GFC years, then I see other government stimulus funding saying, guys, start spending and hiring people, and we go back up to debenturing 700. Which is a real indicator. Where we have other government partners, we go to work. So I find that very interesting. The idea of bringing to us whether or not we want to start inching that up and increasing the debt that we take out would again put people to work, which would be a good thing to do right now. But I want to understand what flexibility we would have if suddenly the economy changed and they decided to start adjusting interest rates up. We could start to do this now, and you've made us a service charge, debt servicing chart. If we were to take on your strategy and council was to allow that, what insurance would we have? Would we be legally allowed, as other governments are allowed to, would we be allowed to change the ratio of our payments of principal to interest if the economy suddenly gave us a challenge?
So through you, Mr. Budget Chief, let me just make one thing clear. This is not new work. This is projects that have been largely, they have been projects that are all approved, largely completed.
Right.
So we have,
Found you didn't have the need to issue the debt, yeah.
we have the need to issue the debt. We have, for various reasons, as we cite on page 60, that we didn't. And we would like to issue that debt. Those projects are completed. We have built in some increases in our 10-year forecast in interest rates, so we've built some of that in.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, because, you know,
So that's included
we've
in this
included some of
proposal
that
where
already.
the debt servicing cost to the Torontonians would go up a little bit. That's including
Yeah.
predicting some increase in rates.
yeah, yes.
Okay, so that is my insurance. That gives me some comfort if we look at that policy proposal. I'm concerned because you just gave, in the breakdown you gave to Councillor Layton just now in base changes, you included in that, you said 7 million reduction in corporate expenses.
So there's a number of miscellaneous things. We can provide a complete list to council if council wants it.
Are those miscellaneous things like materials and supplies, travel, conferences and seminars, business meetings and entertainment expenses, office renovations, et cetera? Because it sounds like the reduction the mayor's letter's asking us to make, you've already made some reductions there.
So, if I may try, so if we look at slide 27 or this particular waterfall here, We're trying to isolate the differences in the types of actions we've taken. So line-by-line review says we look at our actual spending, we look at what the budget is, and we squeeze it or belt tighten it and say, we're actually going to try to bring that down
I'm aware.
based on experience, okay? At the other end, we have efficiency savings that says we're doing something slightly differently,
Right,
how we deliver service, but we're keeping the service level, those savings.
right.
The thing in between, which is the 112 million, are actions that have been taken by the police board, the TTC, or the city in saying, this was the submission, now let's try to whittle that down in a whole bunch of different ways.
Right.
Whether it's hedging, you know, all those different things, and that's what that pile is.
Right.
Okay?
Okay, and you gave us a fair amount of detail. I'd love to have that sheet of paper that you were reading from to get at that 112.
Those are my cheat sheets.
My question is this. I'm looking at the mayor's letter, some areas you may want to consider, and we just read the topics. Everyone knows the letter because reporter Don Pete tweeted it out. My question is this. It says you may want to consider implementing a freeze. Given the constraint we had, are these not things that already when we were talking to staff, we were saying don't increase these things?
Yeah, there'd be a bunch of things.
It would, through you,
Last question.
Mr. Chair, it would be a combination of all expenditures that were reviewed, including salaries and benefits in terms of actual experience. So we have, it's a whole range that has been reflected.
That has been frozen, or did we allow people to make increases here?
Through you,
This
just-
assumes that if we go looking for these, we'll find
question.
millions of dollars
So what
just
we
by
had-
freezing.
So we have not frozen expenses. What we have done is looked at our actual spending as part of the line-by-line review, not frozen.
Thank you, Councillor
Okay.
Carroll. We'll go to...
Oh,
Thumbs up.
sorry.
It's okay. Councillor Campbell next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The slide 13 on assessment growth, why are we expecting $48 million more in assessment growth when just a year ago, 2014, we only realized $25 million in assessment growth?
So through you,
What's that
Mr.
based
Budget
on,
Chief.
and is there risk in that?
No. So let me be clear. I don't think there's any risk in that. The assessment roll was just returned on Tuesday, last Tuesday. We've been getting regular updates from MPACT on what's going to be in the final assessment roll, and the last totals that we got are 1.23. So how assessment works is they develop the roll, and then the roll as it sits for the end of one budget year, for the end of the fiscal year, becomes the roll that you legally must use for the next year. So that number's pretty solid. We're going to go look for some fine tuning of that number because we just got the final numbers on Tuesday. We already had this estimate put in. There may be some plus or minuses in there. We'll also look at some plus or minuses in the PILs because that's just got returned on Tuesday. I don't expect a lot of change in that number.
Okay, and on slide 19, I'd like to know why we're still talking about the loss of the pooling compensation grant. I mean, this is because on that slide, it's a visual of increased expenditure pressures, with one exception, and that's the pooling grant, which was a revenue loss. So why don't we just sort of, accept it, that it's not coming, and it's done, and it's no longer, I mean, I don't see how it's a pressure. It's money that we're not getting.
Through you, Mr. Budget Chief, it's a pressure because of slide 22 behind you. We did not bake into our budgets the entire $129 million of grant reductions that we weren't expecting.
Why didn't we do that?
We phased that because if we were to have done that the year over the 3 years in 14, 15, and 16, it was causing a 1.7% tax increase. We were continually working with the province at both the political and the staff level to try to get relief from that, and a fairly rigorous intergovernmental relations campaign went for about a year. We were hopeful
And last
that
year
we were
we
going
had
to get
we had
relief.
to borrow to cover it.
But then late in the budget process was January, February of last year, we got the final answer that said no.
So are we really being transparent because this is money that's not coming, it's not ever coming, and why aren't we just sort of plugging that gap now?
We are totally transparent. We wrote 2 reports on this issue. We gave council, said, look, because had to take last year, would have been 2 years of reductions, $86 million, 3.4% tax increase in 1 year. And council said, I can't take 3.4% tax hit all in 1 year. So we came up with this plan to phase it in over the next 3 years.
Okay, and then just a question for Josie. The state of good repair, 63% for 2016 to 2025 is classified as state of good repair. Do we measure state of good repair in terms of, one being a Chevrolet and one being a Cadillac, in terms of what really is necessary and required? Or is it kind of like a wish list by department that rolls up into a big number?
No, through you, Mr. Chair. The state of good repair is based on condition audits of the actual assets in place and their life cycles. And so they have a plan on what's to be funded and repaired along the way. If we don't actually get that done in that point of time, it gets added to the backlog.
How often are the audits refreshed?
It can be, depending on the life cycle of the assets, it can be every 3, 5, 7 years. It just really depends on the asset class.
Okay, and then just one last question for Mr. Rossini. The $139.9 million pressure from salaries and benefits, what does that represent in terms of percentage over the year prior? In terms of an increase? An average increase across all wage earners from the city of, the city of Toronto, its agencies.
So they reflect a number of different increases based on collective agreements. And if you want to talk about what we have for those collective agreements that are still that are set to expire at the end of the year, we would have to go in camera on that. As a total increase on compensation, I don't have that number right in front of me, but we will get that.
Okay.
Compensation is about 50%, 49% of our total gross. So 139 on about 5 billion. That would be the percent.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Councillor DiCiano is next for questions.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Through you to the CFO, I'm looking at slide 33, and I see $21 billion is the amount that's needed to be spent, and I'm seeing growth-related expenditures of about $5.5 billion. I don't see the amount that's going to be generated from DCs. I think from previous slides, it's probably about 1.3 or 1.4 billion. Is that correct?
Through you, slide 42 has the development charges, and we've got them up to about $1.4 billion.
Okay, so have we lost sight of the definition of growth-related as a city, or is the Development Charges Act flawed? Well, what's the definition of growth-related, and why a $3 billion discrepancy in what we're going to be spending versus what we're bringing in?
In short, through you, Mr. Budget Chief, to use your word, is the development charges flawed or inadequate? I would say yes. Because of the reductions that are in the Development Charges Act for various things, services that aren't included, that you can't have a DC for the mandatory 10% credit, we do not recover 100% of growth-related capital costs. There's that. Then there's also policy decisions that this council has made. We do not have a non-residential DC that covers industrial. For commercial, we only do ground floor commercial. We do not do offices. So there's also that. By policy, this council, for economic development reasons, have said, you know what? We're not going to do, by policy, full cost recovery. And then on the residential, there's other exemptions that we have, for social housing, affordable housing, for example. So it's a combination of the DC Act plus policy exemptions that council has approved.
Okay, and with respect to Bill 73, the Development Charges Act that the province just recently reviewed and further approved, some of the technical changes that they've made, is that putting us further behind the 8 ball with respect to financing growth-related infrastructure in this city? Have they done us a favor in terms of addressing what our needs are as a city?
So I have to be very careful in how I answer this
You don't
question.
have to. You can just
No, I have to, because
you can just throw it out there.
I don't know if the regulation has been made public yet. So I don't think it has. It hasn't. So I cannot speak to what the impacts of that regulation will be, because I am bound by a confidentiality agreement. I was on the task force. There are improvements in the bill, in particular to allow waste diversion other than landfill and waste and incineration. We now can have a DC for that, whereas before we couldn't. In the bill, there is the elimination of the 10% mandatory credit for transit, and then we will have to wait and see what's in the regulations to see the full impact and the details, and then we'll have to take that regulation, assess it, and see, and come back with what improvements have we gained.
Okay, so overall, with respect to development charges or the formula that allows us to collect on residential growth in the city, you would agree that the Development Charges Act is more suited for greenfield development versus infill development, which is a city like Toronto, and it's costing us dearly year after year.
Yes, I would agree to that, especially in infill development, a city that's moving up. We have excess capacities in some areas, and the way regulations and legislation make us treat that, it is better suited as a tool for greenfield than it is for something like the City of Toronto, absolutely.
So after this review, do you have a reason or an opinion why the province neglected to listen to our concerns and readjust the Development Charges Act to better reflect our needs?
I cannot comment on that till I see the regulations, and I cannot comment on, the drivers of why province assumes certain policies that it did. That is a question for the province. I cannot answer that question.
But you can agree that the formulas that we're working for today will, over the next 10 years, put us into a $3 billion deficit with respect to the money we collect for growth-related infrastructure versus the money we spend. There's a $3 billion hole there. Overall, aside of with DC, with the Development Charges Act, council policies, all in all, there's about a $3 billion hole that we're not collecting from growth-related infrastructure.
When you take a look at everything, including council policies, yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll go to outside councillors now. Councillor Cressy to begin.
Thank you. I just want some clarity first on the operating side, if I could. So the page 82, where we go through Appendix 2. So just to be clear, none of these council-directed enhancements are included in the operating budget. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What is the cumulative total of all of those council-directed enhancements, starting on page 82 in Appendix 2? What is the cumulative total of all of those that are not included in the operating budget?
So it's 67 net, and that information is summarized on my last page of my presentation, which I'm trying to find, slide 30 behind you.
So just to be clear, so the 57 million...
67.
I just want to, so we have a $57 million gap existing in the base operating budget, and there is a $67 million gap on top of that with council-approved directions and enhancements that are not included.
So these are matters or proposals that council referred to the budget process that have not been included. The ones that council did approve, which are very small, there's only a handful, we have put those in.
So could you just help me with some math, because you're the CFO and I am clearly not. 57 million plus 67 million equals how much?
Oh my God, I'm not good at numbers. That's 114 million?
114 million in funds that are either in the budget that we don't have funds for currently, or council-endorsed directions that are not included. 114 million.
Yes.
Thank
Or
you.
124 million.
124
Told you I'm
million.
no good at numbers.
There you go. 124 million. So 124 million. That's a number worth keeping in mind here. And if I can just, so just by way of an example, page 85, the 30 kilometers an hour for implementation in downtown, not included. Page 86, 24-hour cold weather drop-in in January and February, not included. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. The poverty reduction strategy, there is 6 million currently listed in the operating. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And how much within the poverty reduction strategy is not included within the enhancements approved by council but not included?
So that entire amount is not included in the,
And how much is that
Preliminary budget.
and that entire amount is,
that is, the anti-poverty measures are $6.5 million gross, $57 million, $5.7 million net in 2016. Then there's some other amounts. That's, but you do have to keep in mind, it was remind me again, Chris, a 25-year plan? 20-year plan? So the 16 component is not in.
thank you. If I can go to the sheets quickly, this is looking again, still on the operating. How many departments have increases coming in below the rate of inflation at 1.3%?
So if you look at the, if you look at the budget handout that we provided, there are several divisions that are at below zero. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. There's about 14 divisions that have come in under zero.
14
And others that have come in like very close to zero.
Well, and so I see Parks, Forestry, and Rec has come in at 1.2 below the rate of inflation. Social Development, Finance, Administration is coming at 0.4% below the rate of inflation. The Toronto Police Services have come in at 2.8% above the rate of inflation. How much money is the difference between 1.3% for TPS and their 2.8% request? What is the difference?
So that 1.5 points on about $1 billion budget would be $15 million.
So-
The one thing I would like to point out that if you look at the clusters A, B, and C, and the city manager's office, if you control for the fact that...
If it's okay, I got 45 seconds.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I just want to say that basically,
So what-
outside of
can you say it
revenues,
to the
we're
next-
all at zero, the divisions.
So, well, I'm going to bump this up then to 30,000 feet for a second. So we have seen population in our city in recent years and projected to continue growing. Is that correct?
Yes?
And so as such, we see a corresponding demand for services and growth. Is that correct?
Yes.
And we've seen an overall tax rate that has been at below the rate of inflation since 2000. Is that correct?
Yes.
So is it fair to say we don't have and Josie, this is to build on a comment you made earlier. Is it fair to say we don't have the resources now to maintain existing operations and implement council-approved directions in the operating, let alone invest and build the capital required given where we are today?
Last question.
You still get to answer. It's my last question.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cressy. Councillor Perks next.
Thank you. So to be clear, if I look at, and to follow up on Councillor Cressy, if I look at slide 97, which includes some of the transit initiatives that were announced by the mayor, such as opening on Sunday, that's not budgeted for. That's in the new and enhanced. Correct?
Yes.
There's no money in here for what we discussed at council, the foregone revenue because of open doors and the incentives there. There's no funding in this for that.
No.
Okay.
No.
The mayor's task force on Toronto community housing.
No, that's the 13.7. We've identified that it's not in the
funded.
preliminary budget.
We talked about at council last meeting about the problems with gapping. Toronto Public Health is trying to reduce their gapping from 6.8 to 5.8. That's not funded.
No, that is not.
There's no funding for Smart Track.
No.
The council-approved Parks Plan is not funded. It's not. It's listed in those page slides.
On the operating side, that's
On the
true.
operating
On
side.
the capital, it is.
Okay. Where council has duly delegated authority to another decision-making body, and that decision-making body took a decision to implement a program, and we began to implement it, this is the 30K, why did we begin and then treat it as new and enhanced rather than as an annualization here?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the direction was to implement the 30. There was no request or any direction on funding it.
Actually, there is a funding envelope for new signs. It's approved every year. And it's within the delegated authority of Community Council, and we checked with the clerk about this, and we had a presentation from transportation staff that it would come out of that sign budget. We began to implement it. It's a council delegated authority. Why is it not treated as an annualization as any other council delegated or direct decision where we began implementation?
Through you, Mr. Chair, my understanding is that the implementation that happened did not really cost any money in 15, and so it was the 16 cost associated with its full implementation that is not funded.
Which is what we typically call operating impacts of annualization.
Through you, Mr.
Every
Chair,
other
that was
program.
not a financial decision made through
Okay,
council
thank you.
to actually add money in year.
Okay. The big bins, the transfer of that, I appreciate that for single-family dwellers, that the rebate erasure hurts people who put out a lot of garbage. Is it not also the case that apartment buildings, small residential, multi-res like rooming houses use big bins? And does this elimination of the rebate hit tenants, rooming house dwellers, people in small apartment buildings?
So we have not, through you, Mr. Budget Chair, we have not made any changes to the multi-res component. So if you are in a building of 7 units or more.
So there's actually I'd encourage you to dig into this, because we treat rooming houses not as multi-res in tax purposes, we treat them as res, and they use the big bins. So could you find out if you're actually hitting the poorest of the poor in Toronto with this?
We'll look into that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, one further question. There's
Almost.
considerable confusion about the poverty reduction strategy. There is nothing in this year's allocation to the poverty reduction strategy that was not approved in 2015. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, what's in the budget are the annualized costs of the 2015 poverty reduction
And that's it.
initiatives, and whatever might be in the base budget that can be attributable to meeting those outcomes. Any new service enhancements are not.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. I'm just noticing it's 12:15 here. We have 3 more councillors who want to ask questions. 4. So I'm just wondering if there's a willingness to push through, or are we coming here at 1:30 after lunch? Okay. Just a quick, I mean, are there, after quiet, we have 4 more for questions. Are there speakers to the item? Who will be speaking to the item? I just want to get a sense of time. I'm at the will of the committee here. I'm just. Do you want to, okay, there's a move to finish the item. Councillor Pasternak's moved extension to finish the item. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay. Councillor Davis.
Okay, I am struggling to understand some pieces of this. You laid out essentially 2 options in these documents, a 2.17% residential increase option or model and a 1.3%. Is that correct? You've compared them all the way through, including the tax rate impacts.
I wouldn't call them options, they're scenarios, and it's up to council to
Scenarios.
decide, yes.
Okay, well, you've presented another scenario other than what's in the budget. That's the 2.17%. So the 2.17% residential tax rate scenario, it would close the 57.4 gap?
No, the $57 million net increase in the budget results in a 2.17% residential tax increase for the purposes of the budget.
So if there
no
were
other
a,
decision-
if there were a 2.617% increase, it would cover the 57?
Yes, it would, so.
Okay, well, that was my question.
Yes.
Secondly, then, the 1.3% model leaves a $23 million gap, correct?
Correct.
Okay. The 67 new and enhanced were not factored into either model.
That's correct, so it would be over on top of it.
Right. So that would be, I think, about 2.5%.
So every 26.4 is 1%, so that would be about a 2 and a bit, yep.
Yeah. If you add on the shifts, putting aside the new and enhanced, comparing the 1.3 to the 2.17 model, the 1.3% model has an average residential property tax increase of $35 a year, and the 2.17 has an average residential property tax increase of $58 a year. Is that correct? So we're a difference of about $17 a year.
That's correct, yes.
And if you add, though, the shifts, the CVA shifts, the 0.6, it's 0.6 this year for the Scarborough Subway.
Yes, that's right. The council approved 0.5, 0.5, 0.6.
And with, on the 2.17, you'd end up with a 3.34% increase, all in shifts minus the unfunded. Is that correct?
Yes, the difference between the two would be about $17.
Which is about $90 a year in total.
In total, yes. Yeah, 89, 82.
On the 1.3% model, total cost, with a net commercial reduction, large commercial would be minus 2%.
Yes, it'd be with
Not just a
tax
shift,
policy shift.
technically a minus tax increase.
Yes, that's correct.
Or-
Under our current policies.
Or a tax reduction of 2%. All right, and that average would be $72 overall if it was a 1.3%.
72.26, yes.
So the difference between these two, the 2.1% and the 1.3%, is $17.66
That's correct.
per year.
That's correct.
And it would finance
Without new and enhanced, yes.
everything but new and enhanced.
Correct.
So why are we looking at 1.3%?
It's just a scenario through you, Mr. Budget.
I'm sorry, that was rhetorical. We all know why. We're looking at 1.3%. So we're talking as well, and I think this is the first time I've ever seen Toronto on slide number that shows our little CN Tower in the context of all other GTA municipalities, that we are the lowest now, the lowest of all in terms of average tax rate.
That's right.
Yes, so the last few years, actually, since I've been here, the last 3 years, we've been showing what the average tax rate. So we are the lowest. The average taxes.
This is slide 105, if we could see it.
Yes.
Oh, you've got it up.
So that's the tax
So
rate.
it's $1,000 less than the average GTA residential taxpayer, and even with your model of a 2.1%, putting aside new and enhanced, we are asking, with your model, an extra $17.66 a year.
That's your last question.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Mihevc is next.
It's ridiculous.
Thank you very much. My prior questioners asked the questions to basically set up for what was going to be my last question, so I can start it as my first question. The math is telling us that that basically none of the new and enhanced are currently funded. That if we go 2.17, that's just going to keep our heads above water, nothing new and enhanced. So the obvious question that I think we need addressing is, if we were to, and given the fact that we have made some commitments, for example, there's $5 million on the arts side that from the billboard tax that right now is not funded. There's all the poverty reduction. There's ambulance drivers, EMS folks that need to be funded, and so on. Where would you suggest council look? What is your best advice around how we can get 10% funded, 30% funded, 50% funded, 75% funded, and 100% funded. Is it really only the property tax base that we should be looking at?
So I think that is a broader question. I think council will have an opportunity through this conversation to explore precisely that. I'm not yet at this point prepared to offer specific advice because I would like to have a better sense of overall, and I believe I said this in front of executive, I believe it is imperative that council consider the level of services it wants to offer Torontonians and then make sure that its revenue model and a stable revenue model is appropriate to support those level of services going forward.
We did it last term, decide on the levels of service, and I think we basically said this is adequate or this is suffice, but there are all these new services. So can we expect from you in the next 2 months some ideas on either saying, okay, folks, you've got the tax base and that's it, or we might want to look at some of other revenue tools, and here's an option, and here's the one that we think will have the best bang for its buck as a new category. Something like a parking tax, high occupancy high occupancy vehicle lane, or a booze and cigarette tax.
So we have brought forward a preliminary budget for the consideration of this committee. We will work with this committee in terms of any options this committee or broader council would like us to consider on a going forward basis. And we will certainly do that in the context of closing whatever gap there is for 2016. I've also made it clear that we should begin that dialogue in a fairly substantive way in terms of the relative balance between expenditures and revenue going forward for 2017 and the out years as well.
So you're expecting us on the political side to initiate that conversation, to give you direction, or will that be coming from you? I just want to know the process.
I believe that is a conversation that should be initiated on the political side, yes.
Great. And then you'll analyze them and come back with some options for us.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mahevic. Councillor McConnell is next.
Much. So just following on Councillor Mahevic's questions, we will be discussing some of those, and particularly in some cases, an allocation of where those funds might go. Is that correct? That's what you're committing to. All right. My second large question is around the commercial and as opposed to residential tax rates. And I'm wondering when, given that it's a -2 this year, and I do recognize there is a difference between the high-rise residential buildings and the skyscrapers down in the bank towers. So when is that going to right itself to a tax base that we feel is fair and sustainable?
So through you, Mr. Budget Chief, we have a target of 2.5 tax ratio. We have achieved that target for the small commercial, and the target for multi-res, large commercial, and industrial is 2020. So our target is to reach the 2.5 tax ratio by 2020.
Okay.
And we are on track to do that.
Okay.
If we stay with
Waterfront
these policy-
Toronto, are they, sorry, I just have so many. Waterfront Toronto, have their contributions to the waterfront revitalization been factored into some of the projects that are on the table?
Based on the current agreement, everything has been factored in.
Okay.
To the end of the
So for the
one-
move forward, no, I'm talking about the move forward agreement, because the current one is basically run to the end.
The plan that you have before you stops with the current plan. 2.0 is not in.
2?
Any future plans are not in our capital.
Correct, and so that's making a huge difference on the capital because a lot of the projects are being sole funded by us in your capital projections.
They would be on the unmet needs
Yes.
list.
So I really do understand that what you've done in terms of this budget is to suggest to us that, for example, in poverty reductions, which ones are the enhancements and do you want them all, and what do you want and how do we put them in? Is that correct?
That is correct.
So it is not that you don't agree with any of these. You've just simply said that in the budget, these are not items that are currently in the base budget. Is that correct?
That is correct. And in fact, we are very clearly not passing any form of judgment or anything like that. We're simply laying out as clearly as we possibly can the ending point of the process put in motion under the rules that staff have had.
Right.
It ends at this point. We then ask council to provide us direction on two things. What ancillary aspects would you like to fund? We
Okay.
clearly need to make sure that we got the exact definitions right, and there may be some issues there. But the second is, what ancillary or incremental pieces would you like to fund?
put in?
Obviously, staff would be highly supportive of many of those from a city building and other perspective.
Right.
And then the secondary question is, but vitally important question is, how do we then fit that into the budgetary context?
Okay, so of the 25 million that we put in last year, the annualized cost of that is 29.3 million, isn't it? So it's grown, and that has been embedded. So there is an additional almost 5 million that is already embedded in that. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Sorry, I have to rush. There is also 39 million in new affordable rental housing supports, home ownership supports, and the TO Renovates
correct.
program.
Yes.
That 39 million has been embedded. Is that not correct?
Yes, I'm
Thank
getting nods,
you.
yes.
Good. And the two pieces that are sort of hanging out there, and in the capital budget, there's about 14 million, 2.7 in community infrastructure for new neighborhoods. Is that correct? 6 million for affordable housing for women and children. That correct? Yes. And 5 million to renovate the Wellesley Place Employment and Social Services that are one of the things that we have asked for in terms of serving our community. Is that correct?
Those are all in the capital budget.
All right, now, you have $20 million that's still sitting out there for poverty reduction. 6.5 is the number that people are focused on, which is the number of new and enhanced, and 13.7 is the investment from the Mayor's Task Force, which is not yet funded. Is that correct?
Your last question?
Yes.
So, in addition to, thank you, in addition
Very quick last
to
question.
the move forward on some of the things that didn't cost any money, there's about 10 of those, we have actually, as we add up, about $80 million that we've already embedded in this budget that are coming out of the poverty reduction strategy, including, by the way, what we put in last year. So, is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
A lot of work to be done, by the way, by everybody. Thank you. Thanks.
Councillor Fletcher is next.
Thank you. On page 28 and 29 in your deck, I'm noting that police at 27 million and TTC at 29 million. Each of those actually is the same as basically a 1% residential tax increase in the ballpark. Is that right? 27 million police, a 1% increase, 26.4.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, yes.
And TTC 29.4, 26.4 for the residential tax increase. Just looking at that police $27 million, has any of the discussion or the document about modernization of the police force taken place, or have you had a chance to look at that and how some of those dollars might be lessened with a deep dive into looking at modernizing how we do policing in the City of Toronto?
So through you, Mr. Chair, my understanding is that this budget does not yet. The board is still
Not yet.
reviewing that.
So your assumption that everybody just wants more police, which is what you've put in, increased policing is required by the public rather than looking at reducing police costs. Where did you come up with that?
So through you, Mr. Chair, this is the police board approved budget
No,
that's
I'm
been...
asking you're not about the budget. I'm asking in here, you said the driver is that people want increased policing. Where did you come up with that as a description?
Through you, I think it said there was people want increased emergency services in
Well, no,
general.
I'll find
And
it,
that
but it
the,
didn't say emergency.
and so emergency services includes fire and EMS or
I
TPS.
understand, but I don't think it said that, so I'll come back to you. As far as capital and corporate financing, break that down for me, please. 56 million, how's that made up? What are the components?
18 million in CFC, and the balance is debt charges. And if you want the exact numbers, so it's 18.5 million in CFC.
Right.
And debt charge increase, 37.44 million. The
Okay.
totals would,
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you. Now, if we just go over to page 50, we're looking at the capital budget, and that's the major unmet needs. I'm a little, it seems like a very large number, and it is a large number, but as I understand it, let's just take one of them, the Lower Don Flood Protection. That's a tripartite funded plan, so I don't understand why it's in as $975 million, and I think some of these other ones are as well. The LRT is in that way. The Downtown Relief Line has actually increased in its funding from our other projections. Did that number come to you?
so
from the
through you,
TCC?
Mr. Chair, we have not made any judgments about who funds what. These are the parts that remain unfunded and still have to be determined. And yes, you're absolutely correct. Some of this will come from funding outside of taxes like development.
Would you not note that there's other sources of funding outside of straight city funding? I think there's a place for that. On page 67, you're talking about capital budget conclusions. Evaluate revenue options for 2017 and beyond. You have et cetera and et cetera. Could you expound on that a little bit when you come back? What did council ask for in CODA? We asked for a number of things directly, I
Yes,
think, as
yes.
far as revenue tools or other revenues. You've not mentioned any, I hate to say the word, but motor vehicle tax or our ability to at least recapture something from drivers. Nothing's on toll. And that, would you agree that et cetera, certainly needs to be expanded considerably for our consideration?
Yes, then that's, I mean,
Thank you.
there wasn't enough space to list
And
everything.
then if we go to page 113 and we look at the commercial large, which says commercial large facilities, office buildings greater than 25,000 square feet, shopping centers greater than 25,000, parking lots, professional sports facilities. One of the revenue tools that was suggested to council last term was a tax on parking lots in shopping centers. Do you recall that? Do you recall how much money that would have brought in?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, that was one of the revenue tools in
What was the amount?
Last
our,
question.
I'm going to have to, if you give me a second, you can go on to your next question.
Well, that's the
So-
last one.
There's a bit of a free ride there on the parking lots. Would you agree with me?
Back for you, but it can be a very significant revenue tool, yes. I'll get back to you with the exact estimate.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Seeing no more questions from outside councillors, we're going to go to speakers. Councillor DiCiano?
Thank you, Mr.
No, he just had a point of order. It's still in committee.
Yeah, I'd like to just put a motion forward that we limit speaking time to 3 minutes for speakers.
Okay. Yeah, we have to do it. Part of this is, I think, a time issue. And all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Councillor.
I'm sorry, the vote was taken off. I just want to channel the senior clerk here for a minute and remind you that that is a dangerous precedent because that's a fairly significant procedural change. It's actually written into our governance rules that we may, as a motion, want to do that with public deputations from time to time, but you're actually making a very significant procedural governance change when you change elected representatives' speaking time, so just be aware that you just did that in a committee.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Outside speaker, we're going to go outside speakers now. Oh, sorry, Councillor Perks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We've got a lot of work to do. We've clearly got a lot of work to do. There are 3 pieces of work in front of us. The first is that for the very first time in a decade, city staff have been unable to bring us a balanced budget. That it's a difficulty that we haven't been in since before the global financial crisis. That's how unprecedented this is, and that's our first challenge. The second challenge is we have a raft of programs, some publicly announced by the Mayor of Toronto in front of the media, some approved by Council, that are simply not here, to the tune of about $70 million. So when the Mayor announced he was improving Toronto community housing to the tune of $13 million, this budget doesn't include it. When he announced opening the subway on Sunday mornings and improving the reliability of buses and streetcars, this budget doesn't include it. When he announced that we were going to have the open doors policy, in fact, we voted on it at Council last meeting, this budget doesn't include it. When he announced that there was going to be new capital funding for Toronto community housing repairs, this budget doesn't include it. When he announced that there was going to be work beginning on Smart Track, and it would be 22 stations within 7 years. This budget doesn't include it. Beyond that, there are Council-approved priorities and policies, like more work on affordable housing, like the Parks Plan, like the poverty reduction strategy, which the Mayor also announced he was supporting. This budget doesn't include. So we have a challenge to figure out how to meet that. The third thing, and this I want to underscore most strongly, we have just, if in this recommended budget, placed a bet that now and forever forward, the real estate market in the City of Toronto will be both as hot as it is today in terms of the price of sale and in terms of the number of units on sale. That's become part of our base assumption. It's $100 million that was not in last year's budget that staff have added here. They have said that we will never, ever, ever have a real estate market that produces less revenue through the land transfer tax than last year. The danger for a municipal government in banking that way is different than when other orders of government rely on a strong economy. If they run into trouble, they can borrow for their operating so there's no big shock. We can't. It's against the law. So if we find ourselves with either prices or the number of units declining at any point in Toronto's future, we will have to have a variance report coming with massive cuts to public services. This is a very dangerous budget. We've got a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. Councillor Cressy next to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as well, thank you, first of all and foremost, to our staff for all the hard work that's gone into this. This is the beginning of 3 months of hard work ahead of us, but it's also the culmination of many months of hard work coming into today. And so I want to thank our staff for doing that work and, frankly, having the courage to bring us a difficult conversation and a difficult decision that we have to make. And I also want to thank members of the Budget Committee for the time that's been spent coming into here. I want to speak about 2 specific things that I think today's presentation outlines, and that's simply, we don't have the resources to maintain the city we have and want right now, and we don't have the resources to build the city we want and need. We don't. As it relates to the operating, and right now, as we've heard, there is $57 million that is outstanding in this budget, and depending on what the property tax rate is, we're going to have to deal with it. But in addition to that $57 million are $67 million in council-approved enhancements that are not included. That's $124 million. The real number here today is $124 million. And that, the funds there in the excluded portions, $400,000 for 30 kilometers an hour in residential streets, not included. $416,000 for cold weather drop-in programs in January and February for next winter, not included. $13.7 million from the task force, the mayor's task force for TCHC, and approved by the board of TCHC, not included. $633,000 for youth employment programs, not included. That's what's not included just today to build the city we want today. But in terms of the city that residents need tomorrow, that's where we get the really troubling news. And we heard it. We have $22 billion in unfunded projects that we seek to do and build as a city. We're not building a strong city. We're not building a caring city. We're not building a city that moves if we don't address that critical unfunded capital piece. And so I will conclude simply by saying that we have some hard work ahead of us in the next few months. And it's hard work, but it's important work, because I want to come back to something the city manager said at the long-term fiscal presentation a few weeks ago, is the decision here is not on a dollars and cents basis. The decision here is, what's your vision for this city? And if our vision for the city is one that moves people, cares for people, and ensures people are working, and one that builds the city in the long term, then we have to deal with the resources we don't have today and tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cressy. Councillor Mihevc to speak.
Thank you very much. First, thank you to staff. I think you've done a very good job in laying out the choices that we have before us as a council, and I appreciate it. In having reviewed many of these presentations over the years, you're always left at the end of the staff presentation on, okay, what are they pointing us to? What's the kind of direction that they're begging us to figure out? And I think it's pretty clear what they're asking us to figure out, and I think we've been debating this, frankly, since amalgamation, is how do we make the thing balance? What are the tools that we need to, as others have said, build the city that we want? I think the choice before the Budget Committee is, we can do it, and we've done this also many times over the years, we can say, okay, we're going to have a big fight over $300,000 for this particular item, and we're going to take it from there, we're going to rob Peter to pay Paul. That debate I would call the rearranging of the deck chairs on the Titanic kind of debate. I hope that we have to do that. We have to, go through all the enhancements and say which ones are the ones that we really want. Can we find another revenue source or an expenditure decrease in another area to allow it to happen? Of course you have to do that. But I hope that we as council, and as the Budget Committee in particular, since you bring forward those debates to council, is wrestle with that issue of revenue tools. We've had that debate 4 years ago in this council. It became stillborn. I think the big question, the elephant in the room today is, what is that revenue tool that's going to help us this year, 2016? It's going to help us next year, 2017. I know Councillor DiCiano is doing good work around development charges, and that might yield a lot of fruit around the capital program. And, I look forward to that. I think we all look forward to the fruits of that work. But on the operating side, we need another revenue source. It's very interesting. We're about 67, call it $70 million shy to fund all the enhancements. That was the exact amount. That was the exact amount of the vehicle registration tax. We could just put in the vehicle registration tax and we have all the enhancements funded. Maybe we don't want to go in that direction. Maybe there are other tools. Like to me, the one that I want to really explore that I think yields us very significant dollars is the parking tax. $1 a year per spot on commercial lots is something that is reasonable, something that is doable, something that I think will overcome our woes, not just this year, but next year and in the years to come. So I don't know how to. Well, staff are saying that they want us on the political side to initiate that conversation. I'm here to say I want to be part of that conversation, and I'll work hard to that end. I think this is a time.
3 minutes is up. Councillor Mihevc. Thank you. Appreciate your time. Councillor Davis next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, too, want to thank the staff for bringing a very different budget this year. You have brought us a much more realistic budget, and you have identified where the gaps are. And I think shifting the decisions onto council, it's about time that those decisions got shifted onto council. The staff have already found $368.7 million of either savings or cuts and revenue increases as the starting point. And that brings us to the $57.4 million shortfall. Then they've put before us two options. I mean, they're not laid out as options, but they've been presented in a way that we can follow them as two options. One that is a 2.1% residential tax increase. That would eliminate the $57 million gap. And then they've given us a 1.3% increase, and we know where that came from. And that leaves us a $23 million gap. But add on to it the $67 million in either commitments made by the mayor or council, or both, or I should say both, and we've got $67 million that still needs to be addressed. That's a total of $80 million, on top of already having found $368.7 million. Why? When you look at slide, I can't find it again, slide number whatever, that shows the CN Tower, and our taxes are $1,000 on average below all the other GTA municipalities. And the difference between the 2.17% increase on the residential rate versus the 1.3% is $17 per year. And I know everyone's going to argue that's an average, and I understand there are people for whom any tax increase will be a pressure. But we cannot continue to build these false budgets that pretend that we can always absorb the inflationary costs, we can always absorb what gets downloaded from the provincial government unexpectedly, that we can always absorb the increase in wages, that we can always do that and add things. We can't. And our staff have brought us a budget that shows what it would cost if we did add the things that we asked for, the things that our communities need, those investments in our communities that reflect increasing needs in our city. So we have choices before us, and I hope we don't get locked into a debate over keeping election promises.
Thank you.
Because I did not promise 1.3%.
Councillor.
And I think most councillors do not.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Councillor Fletcher's next.
Thank you. I think that this conversation and the options that are being presented here, it's very healthy, the way the city manager opened this up, and I believe the way the mayor has spoken at a number of large gatherings that he's been at, that kind of at a juncture in the city where we need to make some decisions. Really, I do think that looking at what I call the big three, the Toronto Police Service, the TTC, and I'm going to add TCH there, that we need to make sure that all of the dollars they are spending, particularly the capital dollars, are being spent very wisely and well. Because every time there's a monstrous increase, we're now paying for that in our operating budget. So the Leslie Barnes, when it goes from a $450 million to ballpark $900 million, we're paying for that, and the citizens are paying for that. So that is, to me, is just inexcusable. They're agencies, but we need to have a much closer look at those spending habits and patterns that they have grown a little too used to. We have bus garages and other very large capital projects coming on stream, and they must come in on the budget, or the budget has to be realistic. That's the first thing. I also want to say we need to keep life affordable for people in the city of Toronto in all those little ways that our staff have made cuts and done things, but when you can't get a bale of hay on a light standard in a park, that people toboggan in because we've really cut staff back to that degree that that's not a priority anymore, so that's now a dangerous situation. To me, we've gone too far. And I want to maintain that quality of life for everybody, for our parks, for our libraries, for the things that they fought very hard for in 2012. I also am very happy to see page 67. I think page 67 needs to be truly expanded. There are many other things here, and when I referenced the large commercial taxes, for which they do very well for shopping centers, looking at that $1 a day per lot, that per spot that Councillor Mihevc mentioned, it's a $400 million revenue every year. When we voted on that last time, the lobbyists in this city and the industry in this city and the large shopping center owners sent in legions of lobbyists, and that very simple little tax that people would be paying when they go to shop on through the large mall owners, large shopping center owners, was turned back, not because it wasn't a good idea, but because the lobbying was so intense. We're a big city. We have to start acting like a big city, not a big city with a small mind.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. We're going to take it into committee now. I have Councillor Carroll first.
Oh, well, that follows perfectly because Councillor Fletcher really led to where I think we are. I want to thank the city manager for the words that he used right at the very beginning this morning in saying that before we talk about the budget, I want to talk about the revenue model. The model. It's not the model for the city we are, and that's our problem. We heard throughout the day when we were talking about OPEX, we know that we're not really able to balance that budget. Literally this year, for the first time since 2006, we're launching it not balanced. And we know that there are efficiencies we have to look at. We're going to go away with the mayor's letter and try and look at those things. But I don't have a great deal of optimism there because I know that none of the staff members were particularly capricious in what they presented in the first place. So I don't expect to find the 23 million looking at the mayor's list. That's going to be a real struggle. We're going to get as close as we can, but on the revenue side there, we all have favorites. I heard Councillor Mihevc was talking about his parking tax again. Another councillor would talk about reinstituting the personal vehicle tax. I will go outside and rant about sales tax. We all have our favorites, but we don't have a fundamental agreement on what is a model of funding this city. The model approach is something we've never done. What we've done is we've all fought over our own personal choice for the panacea. We're doing the same thing in CapEx. My colleague, Councillor DiCiano's panacea is the development charge review. Well, 18 months from now, we're going to do our development charge study. Whatever the legislation is, we can't do our study until 18 months from now because these things are legislatively timed. And when we do, by the end of 2017, that panacea will be something we throw in here. But it doesn't change the model. The mayor is going to introduce a levy. It's not going to pay for the elevated hybrid. It's not going to pay for the Scarborough Subway and Smart Track. But he's throwing in what is his favorite panacea, adding a levy to the property tax. The model approach is the one thing, Mr. City Manager, that we haven't tried. So I welcome your entrance into this group of staff, because we've never sat down and said, in 1995, when the province pulled out of transit funding, the funding model was broken at that minute. And everything we've done since then, amalgamating and all the jockeying we've done ever since, every single one of those has been somebody's goofy idea of a panacea to solve a fundamental break in the funding model for a city that had then grown to almost 2 million, which is just about the place any city in the world finds that its funding model based on property tax doesn't work anymore. That has been true since the Depression, when the population in New York City was approaching about that amount. And by the time they hit 3 million, they knew they had to introduce a sales tax.
Thank
And
you,
where are
Councillor
we?
Carroll.
Those are my remarks.
Thank you. Councillor Pasternak next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much to the staff for putting these documents together and my colleagues on the budget committee. When it comes to some of the comments made about a conversation on revenue tools, I think we've talked that issue enough. There's sufficient motions through council giving staff direction and the province legislative amendment suggestions. There's enough one-on-one consultation through the City of Toronto Act on where we want to go with those, and then we send them off as a package to the province. I think council has spoken. We need the legislative changes so that non-residents who come into the city, who visit here, who are tourists, who work here, can pay their fair share to help us with our capital plan, particularly when it comes to transit. There is also a little bit of a mythology going through the room that new and enhanced will not be in these budget papers as we peer through them. In fact, we're part of a 10-year capital plan in which we will see dozens of different projects in Toronto Water when it comes to sewer upgrades and stormwater management, Toronto Hydro, new and enhanced improvements, solid waste also. Across the Parks, Forestry, and Recreation, we will see dozens of different projects taken, whether they're a state of good repair or whether they're funded through Section 37, 42, and 45 funds. There will be a lot of exciting things happening in the city right now under what we see. Clearly, we have to go through those unfunded, new and enhanced, and we have to make sure that we strategically pick what's most important in the city and support it and fund it. There are others, some who believe that we can solve all our problems by raising taxes, and that has proven to be bad for seniors, bad for working families, and bad for young people starting out. It's also demonstrated that when we enclose a little flyer in their property tax envelope to make an extra contribution to the City of Toronto, I believe the number coming back is in the $20,000 amount. So that is asking people to pay a little extra across our great city, and the intake is about $20,000. So going forward, clearly, we need a strong conversation on all of these issues. It's not going to be easy, but I'm sure at the end of the day, we will find a compromise in the middle ground on the council floor and get the budget passed, balanced, and protecting the social services and projects that we care about.
Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. Councillor Layton is next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Budget Chief. And first, thank you for the hard work that you've put in to this. I know that you've, having had attended but a fraction of the meetings you have in the briefings with staff, I know it has been a lot of work to this point. And to those staff members that are here, thank you very much for your guidance through what has been my more comprehensive review of the budget as a Budget Committee member. Just a couple of preliminary observations about where I think this is leaving us. One, I think the way that the budget's been presented this year is actually beneficial to council and to the people of Toronto to give us a better idea of how priorities are set and how we get to the tax rate at the end of the day. By showing us where we need to do some adjustments, but by not proposing what I haven't been able to find yet are any drastic cuts to services. That shows that the balancing that one needs to do. I would caution, though, that in this, to get from 420 million to about 50 million, I think what we've actually done is reduced our budget's resilience to external factors. I think when you think about what Councillor Perks said about the MLTT and what we heard from the city manager prior, it's risky to put to depend so much on this one source of revenue to balance the budget. When you look at what the Bank of Canada has said today, it should be a cautionary note that we probably don't want to rely entirely on what we had last year, next year, or the year after with respect to the MLTT. I was really concerned about this $100 million in base changes to achieve the targets. I thought that's where they're hiding the cuts, because they just changed to the base to get that rate down to achieve their target that wasn't given by council. Let's just be clear about that. Council did not give this target. I didn't promise a target. Council didn't give a target. They were instructed by the city manager and the mayor to achieve a target of 1 or 2% of a reduction, depending on whose letter they read and decided to trust. The base changes is where I was concerned, but and we'll unpack this over the next couple of months, but as it was unpacked to me, it sounded like it was being taken out of funds that could be really high or could be really low, and they've classically been low, and because we have such conservative budget staff, we've always put in some contingency around that, and it sounds like we're letting that slide a little bit. Part of that has actually been also letting slide our funds that we have to back up some of this. So I'm concerned that what we've actually built into this budget is less resilience, but I do appreciate that we are going to have tough decisions, and we've got to decide as a city, do we want to improve service or do we want to stick to the election promise of the mayor?
Thank you, Councillor Layton. Councillor DiCiano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, staff, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for the hard work that you've put in so far. I look forward to the next couple of months of making those tough decisions. But I'm one that thinks elections matter. There was an election in this city about a year ago, and someone was elected on a promise to rein in the growth of government and to make balanced, tough decisions, just like families across the city are making in order to balance their books. And that comes down to priorities. It comes down to, when you look at the history of our city, we're always reviewing through the budget process new spending, but we don't look at past spending and where that spending's going. And is it still a priority? I mean, I have an example in my ward. A few weeks ago, I was brought to one of to a park where we are going to, where for next year in the budget items, there's about $650,000 going to be spent putting new asphalt down on an obscure piece of land next to the Humber River. And you think about $650,000. We have policies that say we don't want water going into our storm sewers, we don't want water going into our rivers, we want it to go into the ground, yet we're going to take this huge, beautiful green space and asphalt it. Meanwhile, on Bloor Street in my ward, we've got a list of lawsuits on my desk of people tripping on sidewalks because the sidewalks aren't being repaired. It's all about priorities. Looking at every line item from every department before we easily go to the taxpayer and ask for more money, start digging into their wallets. We need to look at the priorities of the city. I think that this committee, based on a mandate from the mayor's office and the last election, will make the balanced decisions that are required to bring a tax increase at the rate of inflation. I think it's prudent, and I look forward to working with committee members to make that happen in the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor DiCiano. Councillor Campbell next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I have to say that I think that the calls for new revenues are not unwarranted. I won't call them revenue tools. They're taxes and fees. I think that fees, right. But there's no such thing as a simple little tax. You know, if we start taxing parking lots and plazas, then what the plaza owners do is they increase the lease cost to the shop owners, and they increase their prices, and it goes down to the consumer anyway. So there is no such thing as a simple little tax. And I'm not sure about the city's needs for additional bales of hay, but there is no question that, you know, we are a city with great needs. My personal view of this budget, I think the process is right. I think that city manager and the CFO came back to us and have laid the options at our feet on what to do and what direction to give. I'm a little uncomfortable with the reliance on the MLTT at 100 million more than it was last year. I think that there is risk in that. It would not be unforeseen if interest rates rose and the market took a tank halfway through the year. But be that as it may, I think that I guess I'm not only uncomfortable with the reliance on being equal to the 2015 level, but the fact that we didn't necessarily build in that 15% or 10% contingency, notwithstanding I think that there's 40 million in there should things tank. It won't be a pretty scenario if all of a sudden at mid-year we do find that we are under-revenued from that particular cash flow. Just in regard to what Councillor DiCiano said, he's absolutely right. There was an election, and we're only 13 months removed from the last election. The mayor campaigned and won on a pledge of keeping taxes at or below the rate of inflation. The second place finisher campaigned on that very same promise. And although we are one of the lowest taxed jurisdictions in all of Ontario, that's the way people want it. And so our job as councillors is to try to deliver that to people in as efficient way as possible and set those priorities so that people's needs are met as best as we can. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. I will speak very quickly. Now, it's not customary to move motions at the launch, but I am going to be moving a motion to request a briefing note. Reason being is I want to ensure we have as much information and give staff the amount of time to bring this back to us when we get back in the new year. So again, I would like to move this motion, which is that the city manager provide briefing notes to the January 5th, 2016 meeting of the Budget Committee, which detail expenditures in the 2013, 14, and 15, and proposed expenditures set out in the 2000 budget request for the following categories. I won't name the categories, but it's for all divisions and agencies. Again, this came out of the informal process, a number of the questions that councillors were asking, and I felt it was prudent to bring it here today. Again, even as I said, we don't normally do this, but I think we need the information as we're getting into the process in the new year. Understanding that it's a different process than in years past, we are going to be having a very open, and I think we all agree to this, we're having a very open, frank, and transparent and accountable discussion, not only with ourselves, but with the members of the city. We need to provide an affordable budget to the residents of the city, as a few of the councillors mentioned. I think the majority of people, when they spoke in the last election, that's what they wanted. But they also wanted us to include the proper investments, and you have seen over the last year, in last year's budget, when you looked at what we did with transit, what we did with poverty reduction, we have provided those important investments, and you will see through this process that we're going to be continuing to do those important investments. But we also have to do it. We have to be prudent, and there has to be a lot of fiscal responsibility. So I think you're going to see the combination of those three provide not only an interesting dialogue and an interesting debate, but I think a budget that will, come out of the Budget Committee. It'll go off to executive and full council that will ideally keep taxes low. We have some challenges, absolutely, but I think the Budget Committee is up for that. I'm looking forward to that debate in the new year, and I'll leave it at that for now, and I will I have moved that motion.
Mr. Chair, before we vote on that, because I don't know if it needs to be added to your briefing note motion, or you can just get an undertaking. I'm wondering, because when we had one round of questions here, when we first meet for reviews, which I believe that our first week back, can we also have, in one of those meetings for at least part of that, could the city manager return so that we can ask some questions about his overview? I didn't get to that part of my questions, and I'm fine with that, but he's not going to come to all the reviews. Could we arrange that he comes for at least one of them for further questions on his overview?
For his own budget.
Yep,
When we do his budget.
I'm sorry, I can't.
Potentially when we do his budget, you can.
Yeah. Well, we'll make sure that we.
Yeah, so if he could just be notified that we would also like to ask some questions about the overview on that day. Okay, that's good.
Okay,
That
thank you,
works.
Councillor. All in favor of the motion? Opposed? That's carried. That's the meeting. Thank you, folks, and we'll see you in the new year.